Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive deep, really deep into the world's longest continuous culture. You're not just going to learn about Aboriginal Australia, you're going to walk it, breathe it, and maybe feel the red dust settle in your lungs. Right now you're surrounded by dark sky and ancient stars. The desert is cool and quiet, but something stirs beneath the surface, beneath time itself. The Dreamtime isn't history as you know it. It isn't locked in the past. It's now. It's always. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this journey without a few mental detours and the occasional spiritual headspin. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this Dreamtime stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're barefoot in the dust, walking across what will one day be called Australia. But right now, no borders, no signs, no Sydney Opera House selfies. Just vast ancient land and an even older story humming beneath your feet. This is the Dreamtime, or more properly, the dreaming. It's not just myth, not some ancient bedtime tale. It's the spiritual blueprint of existence. And guess what? You're standing right in the middle of it. The world you're in wasn't just created, it's continuously being shaped by ancestral beings. Serpents carve rivers with their coils. Giant emus scratch out valleys. Skywalkers stretch constellations across the night. Every hill, every rock, every waterhole has a story, and every story is law. You're not just observing a belief system, you're inside a living, breathing cosmic map. But don't expect logic like first this happened, then that. Aboriginal cosmology is circular, layered, and maybe just a little allergic to straight lines. Time folds in on itself here. A sacred site might hold an event from 60,000 years ago that's still happening, spiritually speaking, today. You can't escape it. Your very presence right now connects to it. You breathe in and maybe, just maybe, you're exhaling part of the rainbow serpent's dreaming. You crouch by a fire. Not a modern one. No iron tools. No matches. This is old school. Hand-spun kindling, smoke, and flame coaxed from patience and ancestral skill. Around you, elders begin a story. But don't imagine a single storyteller standing up with a dramatic voice. The story unfolds in dance, in symbols drawn in the dirt, in chants that blend with the crackle of the flames. One person starts a line. Another picks it up, weaving it into a communal rhythm. It's less Netflix, more spiritual jazz. Here's the twist. The dreaming isn't something only old people talk about. Kids know their totems. A 6-year-old might already understand which animal she's forbidden to eat, or which tree holds her ancestor's soul. That's your world now. Rules written in bark and blood, not textbooks. Historians still argue whether the dreaming evolved gradually as a response to environmental pressures, or burst forth in a sudden cultural explosion tens of thousands of years ago. What's not debated is its power. The dreaming gives meaning, order, identity. It tells you how to behave, who you can marry, even where your spirit comes from before you were born, and where it'll head after. Let's take a quirky turn now. Some of the ancestral beings in these dreaming stories are, how do we put this, oddly relatable. You meet a lazy trickster who fakes his own death to avoid work. A spirit who gets so distracted chasing honey ants, he forgets to finish creating. The mountains. It's all sacred, but it's not solemn. You're allowed to laugh. In fact, laughter is part of the ceremony. Sorry, still no fart jokes though. Even ancient wisdom has standards. And then there's the terrain itself. You're in a land where sacred geography dominates everything. A cave isn't just a cave. It might be the womb of a great sky being. That oddly shaped rock could be the frozen remains of a spirit creature's final breath. You don't walk this land lightly. You walk it with respect, with awareness, and usually with permission. Tread the wrong path without the right kinship. Heisened, oops, spiritual consequence. No one will scold you. But things shift. This is where your modern mind might protest. You want cause and effect. You want footnotes and fossils. But here's the thing. Aboriginal people have survived over 65,000 years not because they clung to stories, but because those stories held ecological knowledge, survival tips, and social rules disguised as spiritual lore. The dreaming told people when the yams would bloom, when the tides would rise, and when it was time to move on. Oh, and before we forget, some of those ancestral beings, they never left. Like, ever. You pass by rock formations that still contain them. That cave might literally be inhabited by a being that hasn't blinked in 10,000 years. No big deal. Here's a fringe little tidbit for you. Some researchers think the dreaming might encode memories of real geological events. There are dreaming stories about volcanoes erupting in northern Queensland that line up with actual eruptions 7,000 years ago. Others recall coastlines being swallowed by the sea, which checks out considering sea levels rose dramatically around 12,000 years ago. So yeah, this mythology might have better data retention than your laptop. You step through a ceremonial ground and feel the hum of generations. Every chant, every painted body, every carved symbol on a rock tells you, this isn't just about the past. This is a living archive. You don't need books. The land is the book. You just have to know how to read it. So where are you in all this? You're a tiny dot on a timeline stretching longer than any empire ever dreamed. But you're not small. You're connected. Right now, through story, through land, through flame and shadow, you're part of the dreaming. And the dreaming, it's not done with you yet. You're still walking, barefoot of course, across ancient country. The stars haven't shifted, but the terrain beneath your feet feels different. Less desert, more memory. Because now, you're stepping onto a song line, and you might not even know it. From the outside, it looks like a regular trail. Rocks, dust, maybe a few spinifex clumps waving lazily in the breeze. But the reality is deeper. These are not just walking paths. They're sacred threads woven through the landscape, connecting every part of the continent through melody, story, and ancestral power. You're not just traveling across land. You're singing it into being. Each step you take, someone, thousands of someones over thousands of years has taken before you. But not silently. They've sung the mountains into standing, the rivers into flowing, the wind into whispering your name. Songlines, also called dreaming tracks, are spiritual GPS systems, but powered by poetry. You walk, you sing, and the land responds. Imagine this. You're traveling 500 kilometers through harsh country from the central deserts to the coast. You've got no map, no compass. But if you know the right song, you can't get lost. The lyrics describe waterholes, landmarks, hills shaped like emus, trees that lean at suspicious angles. Every note is a waypoint. Every verse is survival. And, get this, someone from thousands of kilometers away could sing your land exactly without ever having been there. Because songs get traded like precious artifacts. Whole ceremonies revolve around exchanging them. Their currency, passport, inheritance. Some songs are hundreds of verses long. Not exactly Billboard Top 40 material, but they've kept people alive for millennia. Try doing that with a Spotify playlist. Historians still argue whether these songlines developed purely for spiritual reasons or if they began as practical trade routes later imbued with sacred meaning. But the consensus is clear. They're both. Function and faith, melody and map. And you know what else? These tracks link language groups, clans, even ecosystems. Some dreaming tracks are so long they run from Arnhem Land all the way down to the Great Australian Bight. That's thousands of kilometers of connected storylines. It's like a continent-sized Spotify Wrapped, but with more fire ceremonies and fewer breakup anthems. You pass elders singing softly under their breath, keeping the stories alive. The melodies shift subtly from one region to another, like linguistic accents. You might not understand the words, but the rhythm still resonates in your bones. You hum without meaning to. The land seems to nod back. Now here's a quirky twist. Some songlines don't just tell you where to go. They tell you how to behave when you get there. One track might dictate that you arrive barefoot, another that you not eat fish for 3 days before entering a certain area. It's not superstition, it's spiritual etiquette. You don't just travel through country, you enter into a relationship with it, and that relationship has rules. Break them, and you might not just upset an elder. You might risk spiritual imbalance. Some believe storms, illness, even death can result from disrespecting a song line. So maybe don't hum the chorus unless you really know what you're doing. One of the most famous song lines involves the Seven Sisters, a dreaming track that follows a celestial story mirrored in the night sky. As you walk, you realize you're tracing the movements of ancestral women fleeing an unwanted suitor. Their journey stretches across deserts, gorges, and skies. You might see their story painted on cave walls, danced in ceremony, or flickering in the stars as the Pleiades cluster. Modern astronomers and Aboriginal elders both point upward, but only one of them remembers the love story. Let's zoom in for a minute. Picture a man walking alone across the Pilbara, reciting a song taught to him by his grandfather. He carries no food, no water, but the song tells him where to find a particular rock formation. Behind that rock, a spring, not marked, not mapped, but known. That's the power of these tracks. They literally encode survival. And they're not just for men. Women hold their own song lines, often tied to fertility, childbirth, and food gathering. A woman might sing the path of a yam ancestor or the route of the bush tomato spirit. You laugh a little. It sounds like the world's weirdest cooking show, but it's sacred, layered, and deeply respected. Recipes, laws, family history, it's all sung, and it's all alive. Some anthropologists have even compared songlines to a kind of neural network stretched across Australia. Every node, every sacred site, waterhole, cave, is a memory bank. The people are the synapses carrying and activating the knowledge. When no one sings a track, that pathway starts to fade. Not just in memory, but maybe in spirit too. And this brings us to a quiet tragedy. During colonization, when people were displaced or missions severed cultural ties, many songlines were interrupted. That's not just a loss of knowledge, it's like deleting chapters from the land's autobiography. Imagine walking a trail you were meant to sing, but the lyrics have vanished. You feel the silence press against your skin. Still, not all is lost. In recent years, communities have been reviving lost tracks. Younger generations are relearning the songs, retracing the roots, reweaving the melody map. Some even use drones and GPS, not to replace the songs, but to document and protect them. The ancient and the digital walking side by side. You pause, place your palm against a cool rock face and listen. Not with your ears, but with your breath. You think you hear something. A hum. A single note riding on the wind. Maybe it's imagination. Or maybe the track is remembering you back. One last thought before we move on. If you ever visit Australia and hike through those epic landscapes, remember this. You might be walking on a song line. You won't hear it, not unless it's yours to hear, but it's there, and it's singing. You wake, metaphorically speaking, beside a fire long since reduced to ash. Not because the people vanished, but because the climate shifted, the landscape breathed differently, and the earth rebalanced itself. You're now standing in Pleistocene Australia around 65,000 years ago, or maybe even earlier, depending on which archaeologist you ask. This place doesn't look like the outback postcards you're used to. The air's cooler, the vegetation's thicker. You hear the low rustle of megafauna in the bush, not kangaroos and dingoes, but their oversized prehistoric cousins, towering marsupial lions, wombats the size of hippos, and 3-meter-tall thunderbirds who would 100% chase you if they were in a bad mood. Think Ice Age, but with more eucalyptus. You watch as small family groups gather along a riverbed, their skin shining with ochre and sun, tools laid out neatly beside them. They're not nomads in the aimless sense. They follow seasons, water, and ancestral instruction. With precision, they know what blooms where and when. They've mapped their world not with ink, but with walking and watching, and they're already creating things you didn't expect. Ground-edge axes, tools so advanced that for a while scientists thought they couldn't possibly be that old. But they are. Fire stick farming, Controlled burns that sculpt the land, encourage fresh growth, and keep dangerous blazes at bay. A practice so efficient it inspired modern fire management. They didn't just adapt to their environment. They shaped it. Quirky fact time. Some of the earliest known evidence of baking anywhere in the world comes from these early Australians. They were grinding seeds into flour and baking flatbreads tens of thousands of years before anyone in Europe thought to stop chasing mammoths and preheat the oven. And now you're hearing murmurs, muffled arguments really, because historians still argue whether this arrival was a single grand migration or a series of smaller, scattered arrivals. Some suggest they island hopped from Southeast Asia in rafts. Others propose land bridges now drowned by time and ocean. Either way, it wasn't accidental. You don't float 90 kilometers across open sea by mistake. These people planned. They navigated. You imagine them arriving on the northern coast, staring out across an unfamiliar horizon, clutching bundles of fire-hardened spears and sacred bundles of dreaming stories. They didn't come empty-headed. They brought law, kinship, ceremony. They sang new lands into being, tethered old stories to new rivers, made the strange sacred, and they spread across deserts, up mountains, into forests, and across plains. You blink and centuries pass. Languages diverge, beliefs deepen. The continent becomes a rich tapestry of cultures, hundreds of nations, each with its own rules, dances, and totems. But all sharing one fundamental truth: the land is not separate from them. It is them. You trail behind a group traveling toward a seasonal camp. They carry possum skin cloaks, flint knives, woven baskets. Children laugh and mimic hunting games, while the elders sing to the land ahead. You notice the deliberate pace. They aren't rushing. Movement is sacred. Paths are conversations with country. You stop beside a cave entrance. The walls are painted, not as art for decoration, but as testimony. Hands stenciled in red ochre, figures dancing, hunting, merging into animal forms. These are not just paintings, they're layered archives. Every pigment, every brushstroke applied with ancestral permission. Fringe theory incoming. Some researchers suggest that certain cave art sites might encode astronomical knowledge. One interpretation even claims that a dot and line painting from Western Arnhem Land maps the solar system. Far-fetched? Maybe. But then again, when you've survived over 2,000 generations, your observational skills might just be next level. As you rest beneath a shady gum tree, the scent of smoke and damp earth in the air, you notice something subtle, a reverence for everything, not as a performance, but as a default setting. Waterholes are visited with ceremony. Animals hunted only as needed, always thanked. Trees harvested with apology and care. There's no such thing as waste, no such thing as owning land. You belong to it, not the other way around. You might be wondering, how do we even know any of this? Well, let's talk archaeology. Sites like Majid Bebi in the Northern Territory have revealed astonishing finds. Stone tools, grinding stones, ochre pigments, all dated to at least 65,000 years ago. That makes Aboriginal Australians not just one of the world's oldest continuous cultures, but possibly the oldest. While Stonehenge was still a fever dream and pyramids hadn't yet met blueprints, people here were making art, managing land, and telling stories that would outlive empires. But it's not all celebration. As the climate dried over millennia, the megafauna began to vanish. Whether this was due to human hunting, environmental changes, or a messy cocktail of both is still up for debate. But one thing's clear. You'd better enjoy your giant goanna sightings now, because soon they'll be memory and myth. Still, the people adapted. They always adapted. When the inland lakes shrank, they followed rivers. When food grew scarce, they shifted their diet. When thunder cracked differently in the mountains, they changed ceremony. That's how you survive 60,000 years, by listening, not just to the land, but to the silences between its seasons. You end the day sitting with a group around another fire. Yes, there are many. The coals glow softly. Stories unfold not in straight lines, but in circles. A grandmother tells of a creature that swallowed the moon. A child gasps wide-eyed. Someone hums a tune that might be part of a song line, or just tonight's lullaby. You feel the weight of deep time pressing gently around you, not as a burden, but as a blanket, worn soft by countless lives, warmed by countless fires. You're not just watching prehistory, you're inside it, listening, learning, slowly becoming part of the song. You're still here, still walking, but now the land shifts beneath you in subtler ways. The people haven't changed so much as refined their connection. Generations have stacked up like layers of sandstone, each one pressing knowledge into the next. You're thousands of years deeper into this story, but the pace never rushes. Time here flows sideways. Look around. There's movement across the plains, small groups traveling with quiet purpose. Their belongings are light, their footprints careful. You're starting to understand. Mobility is not aimlessness. It's intelligence in motion. Food, ceremony, and kinship pull people across vast tracts of country, but every journey is anchored by ancient logic. And you're now seeing something new, seasonal migration patterns that look, well, kind of genius. People in Victoria move from riverbanks to the highlands as summer fades. Communities up north shift to monsoon shelters when the first storm clouds muscle in. There's no calendar on the wall, but every insect buzz and plant bud screams what month it is. No missed appointments here. Then, as you follow a family group through open eucalypt forest, you catch your first real glimpse of structured economy. Yes, you heard right, an economy. Trade networks stretch like invisible threads across the entire continent. Ochre from Central Australia ends up in coastal ceremonies. Shell necklaces crafted by Tasmanian women are passed inland, one careful, handoff at a time. Tools, songs, marriage rites, all traded, all valuable. Quirky bit for you. Some groups traded in smoke. Ritual tobacco mixtures, often laced with native plants, were passed between nations during ceremonial gatherings. Puff puff pass, but make it deeply sacred. And here's a detail that might surprise you. Along the Murray River, the Gunditjmara people engineered extensive stone aquaculture systems, basically ancient eel farms. They created channels and weirs to trap and breed short-finned eels, which they smoked and stored for trade. Some of these setups date back over 6,000 years. Take that, feudal Europe. Historians still argue whether this qualifies as the earliest known example of permanent settlement in Australia. But even if the debate rages, the stonework stands. Now think about that. Permanent engineering in a society often described, wrongly, as entirely nomadic. That's the thing about Aboriginal Australia. The deeper you look, the more your assumptions need replacing. Again and again, you're forced to shift from what you thought you knew to what was always there. You're offered a bite of baked yam by a woman whose laugh is infectious. She shows you how to check if it's ripe just by the bend in its stem. No charts, no apps, just pure observational science. She doesn't use the word science, of course. But what else do you call a knowledge system that understands soil, timing, interspecies relationships, and ecological balance so well? There's another layer to all this movement: ceremony. You follow a large gathering near a sacred waterhole. Groups from many nations converge. Languages ripple around you like water against rock. There's dance. There's painted bodies. There's fire. But this isn't just a party. It's lawmaking, matchmaking, story-keeping, a constitutional convention disguised as a corroboree. You're told this gathering happens every few years, aligned with moon cycles and ancestral instruction. Gifts are exchanged. Disputes are resolved. Initiations take place. You're witnessing a decentralized but deeply effective form of governance. No kings, no armies, just elders, story, and consensus. And frankly, they make it look effortless. Fringe. Theory fans might point to the possibility that certain star alignments dictated meeting times or sacred law transitions. Some believe that stone arrangements in Victoria and New South Wales functioned like ancient observatories, Aboriginal Stonehenges, if you will. Lines drawn to solstices, shadows dancing with intent. Again, not proven, but too intriguing to ignore. And through all of this, kinship rules weave tightly. You've never seen a spreadsheet, but these people basically live inside one. Who you can marry, where you can camp, how you speak to others, It's all laid out by your skin name. There are hundreds of variations, and every community's rules are slightly different, but they all work toward balance, responsibility, harmony. You don't belong to yourself. You belong to your kin, your totem, your story. You sit by the river watching kids learning to swim and throw spears. A boy tries to spear a floating log and misses. Everyone laughs. His aunt calls out, "Don't worry, the log had a spirit, too." It's a joke, but also a gentle reminder. Everything has a story. Nothing is just there. The adults around you are sharp-eyed. They see a bird twitch its head and know rain is coming. They hear a shift in frog croaks and know the wet season is early. This is not superstition, it's data. Long-term, multi-generational, ultra-local data. Who needs satellites when you've got 400 generations of observation encoded in song and story? You move with them, not just across land, but through responsibility. Each group is a node in a larger web. Each person carries a slice of the law, the stories, the obligations. Knowledge isn't centralized. It's scattered like seeds and guarded by memory. You don't write it down. You become it. Even now, you're beginning to feel it. This strange weight of time that isn't linear. The past isn't back there. It's beside you. The future isn't tomorrow. It's already part of the dreaming. You stop trying to understand it like a textbook and just walk quietly. As the sun sinks low and the bush begins its evening chorus, someone begins to hum. A melody you've heard before, a songline, and suddenly you realize you've come full circle, not in space but in understanding. The movement, the trade, the ceremony, they all loop back to the dreaming. Not myths, not legends, but law, memory, time braided and breathing. You lie down under the stars, blinking at the soft swirl of galaxies above. Somewhere in the distance, a clapstick echoes. And just like that, you're no longer a spectator. You're part of the rhythm. You're waking now to the sound of fire crackling, not just near your ears, but across centuries. The land around you breathes, with warm smoke and cold stars. You've been following the song lines, walking in time with a people who've never needed clocks. But now something shifts again. Not in who they are, but in how they record what matters. Look closely at the rock face just beyond that gum tree. You think it's just moss and shadow at first, but then the images emerge. Kangaroos mid-leap, human figures in motion, concentric circles and strange swirling lines. These are not doodles, they're archives, living memory, rendered in ochre and charcoal. And this cave? It's older than the Colosseum, older than the Acropolis, probably older than your definition of history. Some of these paintings have been dated to over 20,000 years ago, though some researchers argue they could be much older. And they're not just randomly scattered. Every mark has meaning. You're staring at the world's longest-running visual tradition. This isn't static art. It evolves, layer by layer, across generations. Like updating a sacred mural one ancestor at a time. You step into the cool shelter of a sandstone overhang in Arnhem Land. The air smells like mineral dust and eucalyptus sap. There's an old man humming quietly, his hands stained with ochre. He's explaining the X-ray style, where artists depict animals with their bones and organs visible, not to show off anatomy skills, but to reveal essence. The inside matters as much as the outside. It's part biology, part spirituality, part TikTok tutorial if TikTok was painted on a wall and lasted 10,000 years. And here comes your quirky twist. In some regions, artists painted images of what appear to be sailing ships, centuries before European contact. Are they literal sightings, symbolic visions, fanciful premonitions? Historians still argue whether these paintings depict Macassan traders, or if they represent Dreamtime journeys, ancestral metaphors, or something more mysterious entirely. You step back into the sunlight, and it's not just cave walls that are holding memory. You see scar trees, massive gums where bark has been carefully removed, not hacked, to create shields, canoes, or coolamans. The trees still live, still grow. The scars heal, but never vanish. It's memory stitched into the landscape itself. You walk beside a creek and a woman shows you a boulder shaped by thousands of years of grinding seeds. The groove in the rock is so deep it could cradle a child. "That's my great-great-grandmother's grandmother's grandmother's," she says with a shrug, and then she laughs. Or maybe more. You lose count halfway through. Down in Tasmania, you notice a different pace. The island's Aboriginal people adapted uniquely to the cooler climate, with fur cloaks, huts made from bark, and sophisticated methods for trapping game. One fringe theory suggests they may have been the world's first cold-weather surfers. Yes, really. Archaeological finds hint at long-standing aquatic skill sets that defy expectations. Further north in Cape York, rock art spans cliff faces like visual songlines. You see beings with elaborate headdresses and elongated limbs. Some figures seem to hover, part human, part spirit. These are the Mimi spirits, said to be the original artists themselves, so thin they can slip between cracks in the stone. The idea isn't that humans created art. It's that art revealed itself to humans like a whisper from the old world. And it's not just drawings. You start to hear rhythm now. Sticks clacking, voices layering, chants folding over each other. Like woven reeds, songlines aren't just maps, they're instructions, recipes, law codes, weather records. One man sings a route that guides his people across hundreds of kilometers, identifying waterholes, sacred sites, and danger zones, all without ever unfolding a paper map. Google Maps could never. There's debate, of course. Some academics insist songlines are purely mnemonic, a kind of elaborate oral filing system. Others argue they're deeply spiritual cartography. But when you walk with someone who knows their line, you stop worrying about definitions, it just is. You join a group traveling to a ceremonial site, a rock platform high above a gorge. It's used only once every few years. The approach is silent, and when the singing begins, it's not for show. It's permission. The land must be asked. Elders walk with eyes half closed, listening to more than just wind. You're starting to get it now. This isn't performance. It's responsibility. As the moon rises, you're pulled into a firelit circle where stories unfurl like scrolls. Some are funny. Trickster tales involving lizards who lose their tails, or birds who can't stop gossiping. Others are somber, accounts of great floods or spirit wars. You laugh at the jokes, you go quiet at the warnings. But the real twist? You realize these aren't just for entertainment. They're data delivery systems. Wrapped in narrative, masked with metaphor, but always about law, balance, survival. Someone throws a stick on the fire and says, "That old story, that's about bushfire season starting early." And you blink. Suddenly, every animal tale, every spirit saga sounds like a lesson in ecology, ethics, or engineering. And here comes your third light joke, because you're overdue. Imagine a modern weather report delivered by spirit ancestors and dancing goannas. Tomorrow, chance of rain, unless Bunjil decides otherwise. You'd probably still check the forecast. The sensory detail deepens. Smoke clings to your clothes. The ochre from earlier has stained your fingertips. Your body is now part of the record, however lightly. Someone hands you a shell, etched with faint lines. "Trading mark," they explain. "My mob's symbol." You pass it back carefully. It's older than some cities. The fire dies down and a final story begins. It's about a place far west where a spirit sank into the ground and turned into a spring. Still bubbles up fresh water, they say. You ask when that happened. The elder smiles. Long time before time. You nod, because weirdly, that makes perfect sense. As stars bloom above you again, you lie back and realize you've barely scratched the surface of this culture's memory banks. And yet you've seen enough to know this. They didn't need stone temples or giant statues. They had caves and canoes and stories that live in the wind. They didn't write in books. They wrote in land. And you're beginning to understand something. You didn't expect. They weren't trying to change the world. They were trying to keep it steady. You're back on your feet. And this time, the walk feels more weighted. Not heavy in a bad way, just full. You're carrying centuries now, tucked behind your eyes and packed into your bones. And just as you settle into this rhythm of memory, you notice something's changed. Smoke again, but this time it doesn't rise gently from a campfire. It churns, dark and vast, curling across the tree line in purposeful lines. You blink. You're watching fire on purpose, controlled, strategic. Welcome to fire stick farming. Now here's the kicker. This isn't burning to destroy. It's burning to create. Aboriginal Australians have been practicing cultural burning for tens of thousands of years. Low, cool fires that clear underbrush, promote fresh growth, and coax animals out of hiding. It's not chaos, it's choreography. You're watching an ecosystem dance, and fire is the conductor's baton. You follow a group as they move slowly ahead of the flames. Kids laugh, elders lean on walking sticks, and no one's panicking. Birds dive into the smoke to snatch startled insects. Kangaroos bounce just ahead of the heat. Within hours, green shoots will rise through the blackened soil. You didn't expect the land to smile after fire, but it does. Mainstream science now agrees that these burning methods increase biodiversity, prevent massive wildfires, and rejuvenate landscapes. But here's the kicker. This wasn't common knowledge until very recently. For decades, Western experts dismissed Aboriginal burning as primitive or harmful. Historians still argue whether early colonial records misunderstood or deliberately ignored how widespread and complex this fire management truly was. And here comes your quirky detail. In some areas, people would burn in shapes, specific fire patterns meant to resemble animal tracks or to tell a story visible from nearby ridgelines. Imagine driving past a bushfire and seeing a giant emu print outlined in glowing embers. That's not just farming. That's flair. You're standing now in a recently burned stretch of bush. Charred grass crunches under your feet, but the air smells clean, not ruined. A child squats nearby, picking up bush potatoes from freshly cleared earth. No tilling, no tractors, just fire, memory, and timing. Then you move into open grasslands, where the results of this burning become more obvious. The land is park-like, dotted with shade trees and wide spaces. Not because of luck, but because of generations of curated burning. There's an old joke among some Aboriginal land managers that wilderness is just country no one's cared for in too long. It's cheeky, but it hits different now. And then you see it, another layer to the burning. It's not just for food or pasture. Fire clears the way for ceremony. You're invited to a sacred site where ground has recently been cleaned with fire. The soil is still warm, and there are fresh ochre handprints on nearby rock. The space feels charged, not with threat, but with presence. At night, around another fire, a younger man explains his responsibility. His father taught him which months to burn, which wines to follow, how to read the trees. Not all trees, mind you. His trees, his family's country. The rules are local, like language. You can't just copy and paste someone else's fire pattern. What works for spinifex won't work for stringy bark. What heals one valley could ruin another. You ask, how do you know when to start burning? He points to a wattle tree. When the yellow flowers come and the frogs sing, that's how. No thermometers, no graphs, just observation, tradition, and a vibe that's been correct for millennia. You want a metaphor? Fine. Fire stick farming is like brushing the land's teeth. Do it regularly, gently, and with care, and the whole system stays healthy. Let it go too long, and well, plaque turns to emergency. You keep walking, and as the weeks pass, you start to notice something unnerving. Some parts of the land don't look right. Overgrown, dense, choked. These are areas where cultural burning hasn't been done in a long time. Maybe people were moved off that country. Maybe access was blocked. Whatever the reason, the result is clear. It's like letting a garden go wild. Pretty, sure, but unstable. Fire knowledge is older than the pyramids, but in modern Australia, only in the last few decades has it been seriously reintegrated into bushfire management. And even now, it's a slow reunion. Red tape moves slower than fire, unfortunately. You pause to rest beside a rock pool, watching dragonflies skim the water's surface. An elder joins you and lights a bit of dry grass just beyond the bank. The flames trickle like golden syrup. just enough to wake it up, she says. You ask what it is. She gestures around. All of it. The land, the seeds, the birds, even the old people. You look again. Smoke curls up like a whisper. You wonder if the land is listening. You're pretty sure it is. Now for your second joke. Because bushfire talk deserves levity too. Imagine if modern weather apps were designed by Aboriginal elders. Today's forecast. Cool burn conditions until the echidna yawns. Strong easterly, yarning after sunset. Wear thongs. Bring billy tea. You move on, but you carry the smoke in your hair. And maybe something else too. An understanding that fire, like everything else in this story, isn't just a tool. It's a relationship. A conversation. The land speaks through flames, and Aboriginal people have been answering for longer than anyone bothered to write down. By now, you're probably thinking about those towering bushfires that make international headlines every few years. Whole towns on alert. Firefighters working triple shifts. Thousands of hectares scorched. And here's the hard truth. Those fires aren't natural disasters. They're unnatural consequences. Consequences of ignoring the old methods, of silencing the voices that once kept the bush from turning feral. But don't worry, this isn't the end. The knowledge is still here. It just needs to be listened to again. Taught, respected, practiced. You walk on through land that glows faintly from last week's burn. Already green shoots poke through ash. A wallaby grazes nearby. Somewhere, a curlew cries out with its eerie, midnight wail. The wind shifts. You smell smoke again. Not danger. Memory. You step cautiously into the red heart of the continent, where the desert stretches like an endless rusted ocean, shimmering under the weight of the sun. Each footfall kicks up whispers of dust, stories ground into the land by feet that walked here before pyramids, before Babylon, before the Ice Age had even ended. You're not just navigating sand and stone, you're reading a living map, etched into memory, chanted into song, and walked into existence. Water, or the lack of it, becomes your obsession. Your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth as you scan the land for signs. A tree bending just so, a shimmer of green in a gully, the nesting pattern of birds. You're learning the oldest survival skill on the planet. How to see what isn't obvious. Every rock, every dip in the land might mark a soak or a seasonal spring. Miss one and, well, let's just say your ASMR bedtime story becomes a cautionary tale. You might not survive this, unless you listen. The desert isn't empty. It's humming. You follow in the footsteps of elders who walked these trade routes for millennia, crisscrossing the continent with intimate knowledge passed down like a birthright. Songlines guide your journey. Musical GPS long before satellites. One melody tells of a snake who coiled through these hills. Another warns of a spirit that hides beneath a dry creek. And you don't just sing these songs, you walk them. Each verse takes you a little further. Each rhythm aligns with landmarks you now see differently. It's navigation with heart and breath, not compasses and maps. At night, the stars above are a second map, brighter than city kids can imagine. You lie back on warm rock, your spine-fitting grooves smoothed by generations. A scorpion skitters by glowing faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere nearby, a rock hole pulses with water sacred and protected. You don't touch it unless you have the right to, unless you've been taught the song, the story, the responsibility. Desert mobs like the Pichanchajara, Warlpiri, and Arrernte are the masters of this arid survival. Their lore tells of creatures that once carved these lands, the rainbow serpent coiling underground, still shaping earth tremors with her dreaming. You wonder if that little rumble last night was tectonic or mythic. Historians still argue whether these stories encode real seismic memory or serve purely as spiritual metaphor. Either way, you sleep with one eye open. In this landscape, every story has weight. You learn about Jukurpa, the dreaming, not just as a myth, but as an operating system for living. It governs who you can marry, where you can walk, what you can eat. Break a rule, and the consequences might not just be social, they could be cosmic. It's not about punishment, it's about balance. You start to see how desert life isn't a struggle against nature, it's a dance with it. If you're in rhythm, the land provides. If not, well, cue another reality check. Let's take a quirky detour. You're taught to find water by following. Bees, yes, bees. Certain species only build their nests close to water. You also spot spinifex clumps bending toward moisture in subtle ways. Then there's the ancient trick of tapping tree trunks for stored sap. Just don't try it on every tree or you'll end up chewing on termites. Effective hydration. Not exactly 5 stars on Yelp, but it'll keep you going. Now here's something even mainstream archaeologists are still wrapping their heads around. Some inland Aboriginal groups engineered water traps and wells with precision. That rivals early agriculture. These weren't just puddles, they were sophisticated catchments, sometimes lined with stone, designed to collect and hold rainfall for months. In the harshest environment, you're walking through ancient infrastructure most tourists wouldn't even notice. If it were made of marble, we'd call it genius. But sandstone and silence? That gets overlooked. You come across a place locals call a soakage, where water hides beneath the surface cloaked by sand and root. Elders teach you how to dig carefully, never wasting a drop. You realize this isn't just survival, it's a relationship. You're being offered water by the land, not taking it. That's a big difference. Modern survival guides might miss the nuance, but your guides make sure you feel it deep in your parched bones. There's even etiquette in drinking. You're taught who drinks first, how to offer water, when to wait. These aren't just rules, they're a social map, just as important as any rock painting. Remember, out here, one wrong sip or one selfish act could endanger the whole group. So, yeah, your Instagram influencer survival tips? Cute. But out here, you'd better listen to Auntie or your cactus. Literally. The desert, over time, stops looking dead. You see the bush tomatoes sprouting after a rare rain, the goanna tracks winding around a dune, the faint scent of smoke from a fire started hours away. And fire, we'll come back to that soon, isn't the enemy here. It's a tool. But more on that in another section. You take a moment to sit beneath a mulga tree, its branches giving just enough shade to keep your brain from boiling. A breeze stirs, carrying with it the low hum of flies, the tick of cicadas, and somewhere in the distance the crackle of a story being told. You're learning, slowly, to read the landscape the way others read books, left to right, in symbols and gaps, except here it's stone and wind, animal scat and echo. The desert doesn't forgive, but it does remember. Every step you take is on sacred ground, whether you know it or not. You drink from wells someone's great-grandmother protected with her life. You rest in rock shelters that hold painted dreams. And if you're lucky, really lucky, you start to see not just survival, but thriving. You ride warm winds north now, dust giving way to turquoise and tide. Your feet land soft on sand mixed with crushed shell and ancient coral, and the salty air hits you like a welcome slap. This is the Torres Strait, where ocean and sky blend into each other, and the people move like they've always known how, to balance both. The land thins here into dots and lines on the map, islands flung between Australia and Papua New Guinea like stepping stones for sea gods. You're suddenly in a world that feels at once ancient and foreign. Dugout canoes glide past, carved from giant logs and steered with the confidence of generations. You smell turtle fat sizzling on hot stones, hear the clatter of shell jewelry, and watch a boy with shark teeth strung around his neck sprint down to the water with a spear longer than he is. Out here, you don't survive by looking inland. You watch the tides, you read the swell, you listen to what the sea has to say, and it speaks a lot. The Torres Strait Islander cultures aren't just coastal variations of Aboriginal life, they're distinct ocean-woven worlds. You learn about 2 main groups: the Western Islanders, known for their Papuan links and deep-sea traditions, and the Eastern folks, whose myths sparkle with starlight and thunder. They tell you of Tagai, the great celestial fisherman who split with his crew and now sails forever as a constellation across the southern sky. Historians still argue whether these creation stories reflect literal astronomical charts or layered metaphors about social order. But either way, you squint upward and find his shape carved among the stars. Trade is everywhere. long before globalization, was cool. Torres Strait people were swapping obsidian from Papua, woven baskets from Cape York, and turtle shell masks with intricate designs that could spook or seduce, depending on the occasion. You hold one up and see a warrior face grinning back at you, with inlaid eyes made from nautilus shell and wild flared nostrils. It's both a work of art and a weapon of awe. The tides don't just bring goods, they carry gods. Shark spirits glide through dreams here, and everyone has a story about one. You're told to never mock them, not even once. That one guy who laughed at the story of the shark that turned into a man. Yeah, he hasn't been seen since the mid-90s. Probably just moved to Brisbane. Probably. You step into a ceremony, barefoot and awkward, as men wearing feathered headdresses move in spirals, faces painted white with lime, echoing birds and spirits from a time before time. Women sing in tight harmonies, voices pitched high like the cries of sea eagles. The rhythm takes you before you know it, clapping sticks, drum beats, and chants that loop back on themselves like the tide. Then comes the thunder, literally. You're told about a being called Kulka, a storm spirit who travels in cloud and boom, stirring both fear and admiration. Kids race to cover fish traps when Kulka comes, while elders sit with calm eyes, claiming he's just doing his job. You try to figure out whether this is metaphor or meteorology, and then a bolt of lightning. Crack so close it fries your reasoning. Maybe don't overthink it. While you're here, you pick up on something clever. Islanders didn't just wait for food, they engineered it. You wade through stone-walled fish traps, built to catch the tide's generosity. You chew on fermented breadfruit that tastes like banana's weird cousin. You sit beside a grandmother as she weaves pandanus leaves so tightly they could hold soup. But even paradise has politics. You learn about warfare, how islands sometimes raided each other, not just for resources but for payback, pride, and the occasional kidnapping. Not exactly the brochure version, right? You spot a stone club that's shaped like a stingray tail and hear tales of night raids under full moons. You try not to imagine what it would feel like to be out at sea in a dugout, the paddle silent, the night full of intent. And just like everywhere else in this continent-sized story, knowledge here is layered. You're taught what you're allowed to know, and reminded what you're not. Some songs aren't sung when certain people are present. Some carvings are turned to face the wall. Some questions get a soft smile and a topic change. That's how you know you're finally earning a sliver of trust. Here's a quirky detail for your brain to chew on. Some Torres Strait Islanders practice teeth filing, not as punishment or injury, but as beauty and status. Pointed incisors were considered attractive and sacred, linked to clan stories and spiritual roles. Imagine showing up to your school dance with a shark smile like that. Bet you'd make an impression. You paddle with fishermen at dawn, and they joke about GPS like it's a backup plan. We got grandma, one says, pointing to a woman who squints at the clouds and names the hour by how the mangroves smell. You believe her? You notice how songs here are newer, more fluid. The communities adapt fast, blending ancestral rhythms, with hymns, radio hits, even reggae. Language is similarly braided. Many speak Kalalagoya or Merriam Mir alongside English and Yumplatak, a Creole that flips between rules faster than you can follow. It's a spoken dance floor, and you're trying not to step on anyone's toes. Yet under all this color and motion, you sense a quiet fear, a fear of losing ground, literally. Sea levels creep up each year, swallowing gardens, salting wells, nudging graves closer to the tide. Climate change isn't abstract here, it's lapping at their doorsteps. Still, the islanders joke, sing, build seawalls, and throw another dance night. You leave the islands sunburned, salt-lipped, and dazed, not just from the scenery but from the weight of what you've seen. These ocean people, with their shark spirits and storm gods, their trade routes and carved canoes, have mapped a maritime cosmos where every wave has meaning. And if you're lucky, you carry a piece of that rhythm with you as you head south again, where a new kind of footstep waits. You hear it before you see it. A long, low howl drifting across scrubland. It's not quite a wolf, not quite a whimper, just enough eeriness to make the hairs on your neck stand up. You turn your head, and there it is. Yellow eyes, lean body, rust-red fur blending with the earth. The dingo watches you like it knows something you don't, which, to be fair, it probably does. You're standing in a moment that splits time, before the dingo and after. No one's totally sure when they arrived. Historians still argue whether it was 5,000 years ago or closer to 8,000. But what's clear is this: they didn't evolve here. Dingoes hitched a ride, likely with early seafarers from what's now Southeast Asia, people who'd been trading, paddling, and navigating before. European boats even existed as dreams. These four-legged immigrants changed everything. You follow the paw prints back into the bush, wondering what life looked like pre-dingo. Aboriginal people were already expert hunters, but the dingo, it brought a new partnership. You track a story where a man and a dingo co-hunt a kangaroo, one flushing, one striking. Not quite domesticated, not wild either. Somewhere in between. Like a roommate you didn't invite, but kind of like having around. This isn't your average pet story. Dingoes were never leashed, collared, or made to wear those tiny dog sweaters that ruin canine dignity. No, the relationship was spiritual, functional, and deeply cultural. In some communities, dingo pups were raised like kin. You see children sleeping next to them at night for warmth, hear mothers humming lullabies with dingo imagery, and notice how every myth you stumble into seems to have a dingo-shaped shadow lurking at the edge. But don't be fooled. These weren't golden retrievers. Dingoes could turn. Some clans feared them. There are stories of dingoes who steal babies or lure people into the bush. You pause at that one, not just because it's chilling, but because it still happens. Ask anyone who's worked in the outback. One minute they're trotting alongside your firelight, the next they vanish, and something about the silence feels off. Here's the quirky twist. Dingoes can climb, like genuinely climb trees. You see it once, those sharp claws clinging to bark, the lean body twisting upward, and it's unsettling. No one expects a dog in the branches. But there it is, grinning, mocking your assumptions. Genetically, the dingo's closer to an ancient Asian wolf than a modern domestic dog. Its skeleton tells of long legs, light builds, and a diet that matched its scavenger-hunter lifestyle. Archaeological digs show dingo remains buried alongside humans, sometimes deliberately with care. That's a far cry from roadkill or trash pit disposal. It's a statement. This animal mattered, and matter it did. The arrival of the dingo is considered one of the biggest ecological shifts in Aboriginal Australia. In the center and the north, they became part of the ecosystem's balance, controlling kangaroo numbers, nudging out smaller predators, influencing how people hunted and moved. But in Tasmania, they never arrived. Sea levels had already cut it off. So guess what? The thylacine, or Tasmanian tiger, survived longer there. Until, of course, Europeans turned up and did what Europeans were tragically good at. But that's for another section. You sit by a fire now and someone throws a bone into the darkness. Moments later, you hear it crunch. The dingo doesn't show itself. That's part of the deal. You're not in control here. You just get to witness. Some dreaming stories claim dingoes were humans once, banished, punished, or transformed. Others say they were guides from the sky, messengers from the spirit world. One tale has a dingo falling in love with a human woman. She agrees to marry him, provided he never eats raw meat. Predictably, he slips. She leaves. The usual tragic arc, except with pause. What makes dingoes more fascinating is that they straddle categories. Not quite dog, not quite wolf, not fully tame, not fully wild. Sound familiar? You start to realize that Aboriginal Australia had room for ambiguity. Things didn't have to fit neatly into columns. You could be in between, both and neither nor. You see this not just in mythology, but in how people interact with the world. Fluidity over rigidity. You learn how dingo behavior varies. In desert communities, they're leaner, scrappier, more integrated into daily life. In tropical regions, they range farther and sometimes vanish for weeks. And then there's the haunting silence of the South, where their absence echoes just as loudly. Every presence has its contrast. Of course, modern times haven't been kind to the dingo. Europeans called them pests, built fences, shot them on sight. That infamous dingo fence, longer than the Great Wall of China, still stretches across the outback, a 5,600-kilometer scar trying to keep dingoes out of pastoral lands. You walk along it briefly, running your fingers over the rusting wire. It hums with futility. Ironically, dingoes are now crucial for ecological balance. Kill too many, and suddenly the kangaroo population booms, eating everything green, throwing the whole system into chaos. Turns out ancient knowledge about balance wasn't just spiritual, it was ecological science in ceremonial clothing. The dingo walks beside you now, not as a pet, not as a threat, but as a presence. It's always been here in stories and in shadows, sometimes close enough to see, sometimes just close enough to feel. A reminder that Australia's history isn't just human. It has claws and teeth and a tendency to vanish when you blink. You move on, ears still tuned for that echoing howl, heart a little more cautious, a little more curious. The sea smells different. Today, spiced almost. A salty breeze carries something else with it, something foreign. You turn your head and see sails on the horizon, triangular and dark against the light. They don't look like anything you've seen before. These aren't British. These aren't explorers. They're traders. And they've been coming for centuries. You've reached a strange and often overlooked chapter, the arrival of the Mocassins. Long before Captain Cook scribbled anything onto maps, long before the Union Jack touched sand, people from Sulawesi, what's now part of Indonesia, were making seasonal voyages to northern Australia. Mocassin fishermen riding the monsoon winds came to harvest one particular delicacy, trepang, sea cucumber. Yup, the slimy sea slug that looks like something you'd rather not step on became a highly prized ingredient in Chinese medicine and cuisine. And these guys were the sea slug moguls. You stand on a stretch of the Arnhem Land coast, watching their prahus pull into shallow bays, sails folding down like wings. Their boats creak with the weight of clay pots, woven mats, and iron tools. And the moment their feet hit the sand, a centuries-old rhythm begins. Trade, talk, cooking fires, ceremonies, and partnerships that echo across language barriers. The Yolngu people of northern Australia don't run. They don't hide. They meet the Mocassins like neighbors expecting the yearly visit. Because that's what this is, a seasonal connection. You watch gifts exchanged, cloth and tobacco from the Mocassins, pearls, turtle shell, and labor from Yao, the locals. It's mutual, it's messy, and it works. Some indigenous Australians even travel back with them. Imagine that. Sailing from the Red Coast to bustling Indonesian ports, wide-eyed and barefoot among markets, temples, and foreign tongues. A few return with stories, clothes, new words. Others never come back. Did they stay? Were they treated as guests or curiosities? Historians still argue whether Aboriginal sailors became embedded in Mocassin society or were simply forgotten by the tide. You pick up traces of this cultural overlap. Tamarind trees planted by Mocassin still grow, wild along the top-end coast. You crush a leaf and the scent pulls you across oceans. Old stone fireplaces built to boil trepang dot the shorelines like fossils of industry. The sand here remembers every fire, every footprint, and language. Oh, it's peppered with echoes. Yolngu Mata, the local tongue, absorbed Mocassin. Words. Words like Belanda, which now means white person, originally referred to the Dutch, passed down from Mocassin mouths to Aboriginal ears long before the English ever arrived. You marvel at this linguistic time capsule, an oral web of contact that textbooks barely mention. Religion, too, got a taste. Some elders tell you that elements of Mocassin Islam, daily prayer, respect for the crescent moon, even dietary practices, left fingerprints on local customs. Others shake their heads. Coincidence, they say, but then they glance at the stars like they know more than they'll admit. Here's your fringe tidbit. There's a theory, admittedly hotly debated, that Aboriginal people had words for iron and sails before Europeans showed up. Some even say the Mocassins gifted metal tools like axes, which changed not just how people hunted, but how they carved canoes and performed rituals. One sharp tool in the right hands, that's a technological leap. And here's something you wouldn't expect. The relationship wasn't always friendly. Some years disputes broke out. Over women, over resources, over misunderstandings. You hear whispers of poisoned water holes, of broken trade deals, of a prahu leaving under moonlight without paying. Nothing is ever entirely harmonious, not even ancient trade routes. Still, year after year, the boats returned, until suddenly, they didn't. You wake one season and the sails are gone. The bay is still. Fires go unlit. The Macassans don't return, not because of conflict, but because of border politics. The British colonists, freshly asserting control over lands they don't really understand, banned trepang trading in the early 1900s, quarantine laws, trade restrictions. Suddenly, a centuries-old connection is severed with a bureaucratic shrug, the silence that follows is heavier than you'd think. Old people stare at the horizon, waiting for sails that never come back. Young people grow up with stories of visitors they'll never meet. It's a breakup without closure. And in its place, newcomers, European settlers, armed not with trepang pots but with rifles, rum, and property deeds. Still, the memory of the Macassans doesn't vanish. It's sung about in manikai, ceremonial songs. It's painted onto bark. It lingers in skin and surnames, in the spice of coastal recipes. You begin to realize this whole encounter wasn't a footnote. It was a chapter. A moment when two ancient worlds met. Not for conquest, but cooperation. And weirdly, it might be the only international relationship Indigenous Australians had for hundreds of years that wasn't defined by violence or domination. You pick up a piece of rusted metal, maybe once part of a cooking pot. You roll it between your fingers and think about how this tiny object crossed oceans, how it was exchanged, used, lost, found. It's not just debris, it's proof. Proof that Aboriginal Australia was never isolated. It was connected, tuned in, curious. And when it comes to visitors, the first real foreigners weren't Englishmen in stiff jackets. They were sailors in bare feet, cooking sea cucumbers and leaving tamarind seeds behind. You sit cross-legged in red dust, and it feels like every grain holds a secret name. Not yours, the ones you're not allowed to speak. Not because you don't know them, but because some names live inside skin, blood, silence. You've entered the world of kinship systems now, one of the most intricate, mind-bending frameworks humanity ever devised. Forget surnames and Facebook relationship statuses. This is older, deeper, messier. Here, everyone belongs somewhere. And not just to a family, but to a moiety, a totem, a subsection, and a dreaming track. You don't have a community. You are it. You look around. That old woman, she's your classificatory grandmother, even if she's not blood. That boy over there can't marry him, he's your skin cousin. The rules are so dense they make IKEA instruction manuals look like children's books. But they work. For tens of thousands of years, they kept social order humming like a termite mound. Complex, busy, but completely in tune. The system isn't uniform across the continent. Some places have two moieties, basically two big symbolic teams. Others have 4, 6, even 8 marriage classes. Each comes with its own protocols. Some groups say the world is split between Dua and Yuricha. Others use names like Palyeri and Malanka. You can't just chat someone up. You've got to run a mental flowchart of kin ties, ancestral lines, and ceremonial compatibility. And then there are the secret names. True names. You don't use them in public. Sometimes they're only whispered during ceremony, sometimes only after death. You're assigned different names for different contexts. Birth name, bush name, spirit name, skin name, and they're all real, all alive. You try to wrap your head around it and you kinda can't. But you feel it, like gravity, unseen but undeniable. In this world, marriage is more than love or attraction. It's strategy. Matchmaking means maintaining balance. If you marry the wrong way, you risk shame, social fracture, or worse. You hear stories of elders who had to be relocated because they accidentally married into the wrong skin group. One mistake and the whole system hiccups. So how do people even keep track? Story. dance, language. You watch a corroboree, a ceremonial performance where every movement encodes kinship roles. One stomp means father's line. One clap means mother's law. This isn't just art, it's instruction. You start noticing how people speak. No one says my uncle. They say my mother's brother. Specific, respectful, functional. And if you think that's neat, wait till you hear about avoidance. Relationships. Certain relatives, especially in-laws, you're expected to avoid completely. You don't sit with them, you don't speak directly, you might not even make eye contact. You learn a whole side language just to communicate respectfully around your mother-in-law. There's even joking relationships where teasing is expected. You're encouraged to roast certain relatives. Keeps egos in check, apparently. This web of connection isn't just about keeping peace, it's about belonging. No one floats alone. Everyone fits somewhere. If someone passes away, their kin duties ripple through the network. Mourners step in, rituals adjust, and balance is restored. Now, here comes your quirky gem. Some clans have animal totems so sacred they can't even eat them. Not just don't want to, they physically react. A man might vomit if he accidentally eats his own totem animal, not because it's taboo, because it's like eating part of himself. And here's the debate. Anthropologists have argued for decades whether this entire kinship grid was purely cultural, or if it also carried genetic wisdom, preventing inbreeding across generations. Modern science has tried to map kinship lines onto DNA strands, but you don't need a lab coat to see this system works. It's lasted longer than most empires. You follow someone through the bush who knows all this by heart. She rattles off names and connections that stretch across regions. From this hill to that coast, she knows where her cousin's grandmother was buried, which fire circle belongs to which clan, and who can marry whom 5 generations down. You ask her how she remembers it all. She shrugs and taps her temple. It's all in the song. Ah, yes, song. You forgot that part. Song lines don't just map geography, they map genealogy. Every chorus encodes family trees. You can literally sing someone's ancestry into being. Now try doing that with your birth certificate. Still, colonization hit this structure like a hammer to stained glass. Missionaries couldn't make sense of it. Government forms had no box for moiety. The kinship system was often dismissed as primitive. Worse, it was disrupted on purpose. Children were removed from their families and placed in institutions with no one from their skin group. Entire lines were forgotten, fractured. But kinship isn't dead. You feel it in the way elders greet newcomers, in how someone calls a stranger auntie after one conversation, in the way Aboriginal kids today still get their skin names even in cities. It's not nostalgia, it's survival. You overhear a teenager on a phone call. Nah, can't date him. Wrong skin. She rolls her eyes but smiles. It's not just about rules. It's about knowing who you are in relation to everyone else. And who are you? That's the trick. You're not just you. You're someone's nephew, someone's dream descendant, someone's responsibility. You belong to people, and people belong to you. That's not control, that's connection. Dust kicks into your throat as feet stomp in rhythm around the fire. Smoke spirals like a spirit snake through eucalyptus branches overhead. You sit quietly, because you were told to, but you're not just watching a dance. You're watching law being passed down. In this place, ceremony isn't a performance. It's legislation, therapy, and church rolled into one, plus a good dose of fear. Tonight, someone will be named. Someone will be sung. And someone might be cursed. You've entered the unsettling, powerful world of Aboriginal ceremony and bone pointing. Across the continent, ceremonial life holds everything together. Land, law, love, birth, death, memory, justice. And not the let's light a candle and sing kumbaya kind of ceremony. This is old magic, the serious kind. You mess up, and the consequences are cosmic. People are painted in ochre, marked by kin, and cloaked in tradition older than history books. The night hums with clapsticks, didgeridoos, and deep voices that somehow sound both human and more than human. You watch men and women move in separate circles, keeping to roles laid out long before their grandparents were born. But ceremony doesn't just teach, it enforces, and that's where things get sharp. You learn about the kurdecha. Depending on the region, he's a ritual enforcer, sometimes even called a magic killer. He's secretive, often barefoot or wearing special feathered shoes to mask his steps. When a curse is cast, he might appear out of nowhere, armed not with violence but with belief. Because in this world, belief is the weapon. Then there's the bone. Yes, a real one, usually made from human or emu remains, slim and sharpened. When someone is found guilty of breaking traditional law, maybe by sorcery, maybe by social offense, the bone is pointed at them. Not touched, not thrown, just pointed, and people die. Let that sink in. The person doesn't die from poison or attack. They die because they believe they're supposed to. Their entire framework says, this is final. The mind gives the body its marching orders. Some collapse within days. Others fade slowly. But it happens. You might scoff. Psychosomatic, you think? Maybe. But also, extremely effective. What court system has ever matched that level of buy-in? Historians still argue whether bone pointing is purely psychological or whether other factors, like social exile or emotional trauma, contribute to death. Either way, you don't shrug off the curse, you honor it or you don't survive it. Now let's step back. Because not all ceremony is terrifying. Some of it is joyous, intimate, ecstatic. You see initiation ceremonies where boys become men, isolated, taught sacred stories, given new names, sometimes scarified. The pain is part of the process. Girls, too, go through rites of passage, though often more private, more protected. These moments aren't just traditions, they're transformations. People come out changed, spiritually and socially. One moment, a kid. The next, a man who knows his dreaming and carries it like fire in his chest. You learn about mourning ceremonies, too. Wailing that lifts roofs, smoking rituals to clear a house after death. The dead aren't spoken of directly for a time. They're given replacement names, sometimes new identities altogether, so their spirit can move on without being tethered. One fringe fact for you. In some groups, mourning included sari cuts, wearing self-inflicted wounds on the arms or legs, showing grief physically. Not self-harm, not punishment, just raw, visible mourning. You don't bury grief here, you wear it. There's a quiet beauty in the rules. You don't walk on certain paths after dark because the spirits do. You don't touch sacred items unless you've earned the right. And you absolutely don't take photos of ceremonies without permission. These aren't stage shows, these are sacred blueprints. But colonization did what it always does. It tried to flatten this intricate universe. Missionaries labeled ceremonies as devil worship. Authorities banned initiation practices. Sacred sites were bulldozed or fenced off. Elders who held ceremonial knowledge were jailed for following law. Some songs were lost. Some languages faded. Some bones, quite literally, were locked in museums, yet somehow ceremony adapted. Some groups kept traditions underground. Secret corroborees in the bush, quiet rites in backyard sheds, disguised rituals slipped into Christian services. A public smile, a private law. Today you might see a smoking ceremony outside a school opening or a welcome to country at a music festival. But don't confuse that with the full picture. Those are surface ripples. The real ceremonies, the ones where ancestors are sung awake, still happen. Quietly, deeply. Sometimes you're invited. Sometimes you're not. You're told that some knowledge isn't for you. And honestly, that's okay. Some truths aren't yours to carry. You don't own the dreaming just by showing up. Still, you feel it in the air. The echo of something larger than you. A hum beneath your ribcage. The soft clack of clapsticks in the night. You remember a joke someone made earlier that day. Something about how Western society's biggest ritual is scrolling at red lights. It stings a little. Because what you're witnessing here feels real, grounded, generational. And somehow, even with bones and shadows involved, safe. So you sit by the fire, unsure what tomorrow brings. But you know this. Ceremony doesn't explain the world. It is the world, and when you leave, you'll carry the smoke in your hair and the silence of bone pointing in the back of your mind. Just don't tell anyone where the fire circle was. Some things stay between the dust and the stars. You squint into the sky as smoke coils upward in slow spirals. There's a quiet hum in the air tonight, something between wind and breath. You're crouched beside the clever men now, deep in the hush of preparation. Their eyes catch moonlight in a way that makes you pause. Not everything can be explained, and that's sort of the point. This is where things get blurry between science and sorcery. Among your people, there are those who carry more than just spears and songs. The clever men, also called Nganakari, Meparn, or Kurdaicha, depending on where you are, walk the edge between the seen and the unseen. Healers, enforcers, dreamers, bone pointers. You don't just learn from them. You survive because of them. One of them hums now, hands flicking, over a body lying flat on the red dirt. The patient's chest rises and falls in uneasy rhythm. Something's wrong inside, everyone feels it. There's no medicine cabinet here, no latex gloves, just quartz crystals, ochre, chants passed down through generations, and one feather that always seems to move, even without wind. You watch as the clever man reaches down, murmuring something barely audible. A small rock is drawn from the patient's side, as if by magic. No blood, just relief. You'd say it was sleight of hand if not for the time it happened to you. These clever men don't just heal, they see, past skin and words, into the bones of a moment. They dream with precision. They know when someone's lying, when someone's cursed, when someone's had a nightmare sent by a jealous cousin's uncle from 2 settlements over. You'd laugh if it hadn't turned out to be true once. The air gets heavier when they're around, not in a scary way, just aware. But they're not just village doctors. They're also the ones people fear, especially when they're wearing the sandals made of emu feathers, silent, soft, and a little too fast for comfort. These are the Kurdaicha shoes, worn during punishments, revenge missions, and spiritual enforcement. They're stitched together from human hair and mystery. You once saw a pair dangling in an old tree. No one dared touch them. Sometimes it's not what the clever men do, it's what people believe they can do. Belief itself becomes a weapon. Bone pointing is a good example. One long, thin bone. A ritual. A name whispered. And then, the victim just withers. Not immediately, but over days, sometimes weeks. They lose the will to live. Not because of the bone's sharpness, but its symbolism. Modern doctors have struggled to explain it. Psychosomatic collapse, they call it. But they don't have a word for when a glance feels like a storm cloud wrapped in skin. The clever men don't always explain themselves. Sometimes you see one staring at the horizon for hours, no movement, no blink. Then he gets up, shakes off the dust, and says, "There's going to be rain tomorrow." And he's right. But they're not all old men with beards and smoke. Some are women. Some are young. Some start as jokesters before they're chosen. There's a right, though no one will explain it to you. Not until you're ready. If you ask too soon, the answer is just a raised eyebrow and a chuckle, like you've tried to skip a chapter in a story that's meant to unfold slowly. One clever man was said to have cured blindness by blowing across someone's face. Another was rumored to levitate for a second, only a second, but enough to make everyone quietly agree not to ask about it again. Historians still argue whether the clever men's abilities were exaggerated or misunderstood, but ask anyone who's lived out bush, they'll tell you it's best not to doubt. Even in modern times, people still seek them out. Not in tourist brochures or museum pamphlets, but late at night in quiet houses, when dreams feel too loud. They carry iPhones now sometimes, but the old tools still hum in their hands. The contrast with Western medicine is sharp, and sometimes hilarious. One clever man was taken to a city hospital for a checkup. He kept politely correcting the doctor about where his organs were. The doctor laughed, until the scan showed the clever man was right. "You were there, you laughed too." Then stopped, quickly. It's not all solemn chants and smoke, though. Some clever men love a good dirty joke. One used to hide lizards in his cloak just to scare kids mid-lesson. Another kept pretending to misplace his healing crystals and accidentally grab a pebble from the fire. Cue chaos. Their humor's dry like the land, but comforting. Tonight, as the stars watch silently overhead, you realize something. Their power isn't just in the rituals, the chants, or even the belief. It's in their role as anchors between the physical and spiritual, between logic and dream, between what happened and what might happen if you forget to respect both. You once asked one what it takes to become a clever man. He just grinned, handed you a feather, and said, "Start by listening more than you talk." Then he stole your quiche, damper bread, and vanished into the dark. You wake to a coastline that no longer exists. The shoreline has crept inland overnight, not in your dream, but in the shape of the world. The saltwater licks where it didn't reach before, and the breeze carries the breath of a sea that wasn't here last generation. You're standing on a ridge, staring out, and the ocean stares right back, new and unapologetic. It's around 12,000 years ago now, give or take. You don't have a calendar, but the signs are obvious. The glaciers far away, too far for you to ever see, have melted, and the water has risen like it's been waiting. The world is remaking itself. No meteor, no dragons, no internet apocalypse. Just water, slow and steady, folding the edges of the continent inward. When the last ice age ended, Australia wasn't the Australia you know from school maps. It was part of a supercontinent called Sahul, joined with New Guinea and Tasmania. You could walk from Arnhem Land to the southern jungles of what is now Papua New Guinea without ever getting your toes wet. But not anymore. Now the sea is rising, and it's hungry. You remember the old stories, the ones your great-grandmother whispered during storms, about canoes carrying whole families to safety, about sand swallowing campgrounds, about spirits who once lived inland, now trapped beneath waves. At the time, they sounded like bedtime metaphors. Now they sound like yesterday. And here's where it gets a bit eerie. Those stories, they've lasted. Oral traditions passed down for thousands of years that still talk about when the sea flooded lands that are now submerged. Not vaguely, not mythically. Specifically, coastal Aboriginal groups from across the country tell of places now underwater. Sacred sites, hunting grounds, freshwater springs. And modern geologists, they've mapped those submerged features. Turns out they line up. Historians still argue whether this is hard evidence of oral history spanning 10 millennia or just uncanny coincidence. But if you ask your uncle, he just rolls his eyes and says, "Of course we remember. Why wouldn't you walk across a beach where not long ago there was forest. The skeletons of trees still poke through the tide like they're reaching up for breath. You crouch and touch the sand. It's strange how fast the land changes, and stranger still how you learn to adapt. No time for mourning lost coastline. Your people shift. They move. Stories move with them. In Tasmania, the sea cuts the land off entirely. Your cousins down there become islanders almost overnight, and their world gets colder, lonelier. But they keep the fire going. Literally. Archaeologists have found evidence that Tasmanian Aboriginal people kept hearth fires burning in caves for thousands of years without letting them go out, not once. Imagine that. One unbroken flame passed like a sacred breath through centuries. Meanwhile, new landscapes emerge. Bays become estuaries. Flatlands become archipelagos. One of your elders dreams of a dolphin showing the way to new fishing grounds. The next day you find a shoal teeming with mullet. Coincidence? Maybe. But maybe not. Your creation stories adapt too. That's the trick. These stories aren't brittle. They bend. They fold in new truths, like rivers changing course. One version says the rainbow serpent carved the rivers and then wept so hard her tears became the sea. Another says the land turned its face away from the sun and cried off its glaciers. Either way, you're left with salt and change. Sometimes, you get a flash of fear. Not because the world is ending, but because it's reminding you that you are small. You think of the drowned lands, the plains that once connected Mornington Island to the mainland, now hidden under salty waves. or the sunken valleys off the Kimberley coast, now home only to fish and memory. A few elders speak of stone arrangements that once stood far from shore. Now fishermen drop lines above their ghost shadows. One morning you walk out and realize a lagoon has cut off a familiar trail. You have to carve a new one. And with that path, a new songline. You hum it under your breath, placing markers with every step. That mangrove root, that heron feather, that twisted shell. Navigation reborn. There's a fringe theory, too wild for mainstream textbooks but kind of delicious in its cheekiness, that your ancestors might have encoded ancient climate data into story, not in charts or graphs, but in metaphor, location, and rhythm. Some even say your people were the first climatologists. You chuckle at the idea, but then again, who else has stories that survive tsunamis? One day, a boy from another clan turns up with tales of his own. His people live further inland now, but once lived where the sea now sleeps. He tells of caves that echoed with bats, now reachable only by diving. You recognize the place. You used to dream of it. And still, the sea comes, not as enemy, not as friend, just as reality. You learn to harvest differently. You learn the tides. You learn that seagrass beds hold dugongs and coral shelters fish. You watch your people become marine experts without ever writing a manual. A shell becomes both decoration and depth gauge. A certain bird's flight tells you the tide's about to turn. You feel more oceanic now, not less grounded, but more adaptable. And so you keep moving. Not just walking, but shifting internally. This isn't just about migration, it's about cultural evolution. Your stories evolve, your maps evolve, your understanding of place evolves. But the beating heart of your world, the dreaming, remains constant. It just learns to swim. You sit by a campfire one night, older now. A kid asks why the stars reflect in the water. You think for a while. Then you say, because they miss what used to be land. The kid nods. Story accepted. Memory passed. You hear the tale before you ever see the bones. There's a murmur going round the camp. Stories of enormous creatures from long ago. Not in the usual mythic sense, but big in the, what do you mean a wombat the size of a car? Kind of way. You think it's a joke until you find one of the skulls half buried in a riverbank. Its curved sockets staring at nothing. That's no kangaroo. That's something else. You're walking alongside the memories of megafauna now. Australia's Ice Age beasts. Diprotodons, giant echidnas, thunderbirds, towering marsupial lions that could probably unalive you without breaking a sweat. And the elders' stories? They match surprisingly well. Tales of creatures that walked heavily, snorted loudly, and vanished when people stopped listening. You run your hand across fossilized bone, rough and ancient, like something trying to remember its own shape. It's hard to imagine what life would have looked like with 3-ton herbivores waddling around. But if the stories are true, and they usually are, you were there. Or rather, your ancestors were. Not just watching, but possibly hunting, possibly riding, possibly running, like mad. This is where it gets chewy. Historians still argue whether Aboriginal people coexisted with megafauna or caused their extinction. Some say firestick farming reshaped the land so drastically that those big fellas couldn't keep up. Others argue the climate did the heavy, lifting droughts, heat, shifting ecosystems. You've got questions. And a vague sense that a campfire story you once heard about someone spearing a walking boulder with fur might not have been pure metaphor. One of the old men insists that his grandfather saw a bunyip, described it as a cross between a platypus, a seal, and a nightmare. Said it lived in a billabong and screamed like a dying man. You'd laugh. Except a few months back, someone found fossil remains of a huge prehistoric marsupial amphibian not far from that same billabong. Coincidence? Sure. Until the bones start lining up with the songs. There are also whispers about the Mihirung Paringmal, the giant thunderbird. Stood nearly 3 meters tall, weighed half a ton, and could outrun most humans on foot. Try picturing that next time you're jogging. According to one tale, the ancestors tricked it by painting themselves with red ochre and standing still like termite mounds. Clever, a bit terrifying, but clever. And then there's the Yowie. You roll your eyes, of course. Everyone does. Until you spend a night in the bush and hear footsteps where there should be none. Every region has its version. A hairy man, a tall shadow, eyes like coals. Some say he's the last of the old ones, surviving in caves and crevices. Others say he's just what fear sounds like in the dark. But still, the stories continue, passed down with a knowing shrug. We don't say it's true, your auntie says, but we don't say it's not. One of the quirkiest debates floats up from recent digs. Tool marks on megafauna bones. Some scientists say they've found cuts that could only be made by humans. Evidence that our people hunted, butchered, maybe even ceremonially buried these giants. Others call it erosion, nature, chance. You stare at a rib bone with a perfectly straight groove and think, maybe we were braver than we remember. Out on the floodplains, you imagine the ground shaking with every footfall. You see a child pointing at a diprotodon, thinking it's a rock that started to move. You imagine the first human to approach such, a beast, hand extended, spear ready, adrenaline doing somersaults in their chest. You hope they survived. You wonder if their story made it into the dreaming. And of course, the dreaming holds all of this. The old ones never named things extinct. They named them asleep, hidden, waiting. Even now, when you walk under the ghost gums, you can almost feel the weight of things long gone. You wonder if the kangaroo glances behind it when no one's watching. If the cassowary remembers its taller cousin. You crouch beside a rock shelter, etched with paintings. Most are the usual suspects, fish, boomerangs, handprints, but one shape catches your eye. It's massive, round, almost wombat-shaped. But the scale? It's towering over the human figures nearby. You call your cousin over. He squints, grins, and says, "That's Nana Diprotodon. Used to fart so loud it scared birds off the cliffs." He's probably joking. Probably. You move inland now, past dry lake beds and salt-crusted plains, places that once teemed with life. Fossils pop up like ghosts refusing to stay buried. A jawbone here, a tooth there. Evidence. And every time science catches up, your mob just nods and says, "Told you. Not all megafauna were friendly herbivores." The Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion, had jaws strong enough to crunch bone and a taste for ambush. Some say it still haunts remote ravines. You're not entirely convinced it's extinct. Some footprints don't look right. Some noises don't sound familiar. And some elders are just too cagey when you ask. One day a researcher sets up shop near your community. She's here to ask questions, take samples, map fossil beds. She's respectful, which is a relief. You take her to a dry creek bed with a story attached. She laughs when you say the land swallowed the beast whole. Then she starts digging and finds what looks like the heel bone of a giant kangaroo. She doesn't laugh after that. What you're starting to realize is that your people weren't just passive observers of natural history. They were part of it, shaping it, surviving it, recording it in ways scientists are only now beginning to understand. You didn't just see the end of an age, you helped carry it into memory. So next time someone scoffs at a story about giant goannas or thunderbirds or hairy men with bad attitudes, you'll just smile. Because stories have teeth, and sometimes they leave fossil prints. You feel the wind shift before the sails appear. There's a strangeness on the horizon. White triangles, not clouds, gliding steadily closer. You've never seen anything like them. Some of the older people have heard whispers from up north, tales traded along the song lines about ghost ships and pale men who stink of salt and metal. But this is new. You're standing on the shore, squinting at a vessel that's too large, too angular, too arrogant. It doesn't drift like the dugouts from the Torres Strait or the Macassan Prouse from Sulawesi. It slices the ocean like it owns it, and it doesn't stop at the reef. You tense. Your clan watches in silence. The water swells around the hull like it's trying to push the thing back out to sea, but it keeps coming. Finally, it anchors. A longboat is lowered, oars flash. Strangers approach. There's an eerie sense of déjà vu even though this is a first contact. The wind tastes like metal. The birds are silent. Your skin prickles. This is James Cook's arrival in 1770. Or at least that's what the textbooks say. But from where? You're standing. It's not history, it's intrusion. You don't know his name. You only know that he walks with the confidence of someone who believes what he sees is his for the taking. He steps ashore at Botany Bay where you're gathering food with your mob. You watch him from behind the cover of saltbush. He gestures, smiles sort of, then raises a musket and fires, not to kill but to startle. A warning shot. You flinch anyway. That's the first sound of empire. A sharp crack, a puff of smoke, and suddenly your land is a question mark. The British call it an encounter. You call it something else, a beginning of endings. From that moment, everything shifts, not all at once, not with explosions and armies, but with ripples, like when a stone hits a still pond. Tiny changes that soon become tsunamis. You watch the newcomers collect plant specimens like children picking flowers. One man, a naturalist, marvels at your trees. He names them after people who've never seen them. Banksia, after Sir Joseph. Banks. You already had a name for that tree, but nobody asks. The visitors stay long enough to draw, sketch, measure. They take seeds. They carve the date into rocks, and then they leave. You breathe. Maybe it was just a weird visit. Maybe they won't come back, but you know better. Your grandmother says, that was the scout. She's not wrong. A scout for something bigger, something hungrier. Historians still argue whether Cook understood what he was doing when he claimed the East Coast for Britain. Whether he truly believed the land was uninhabited, terra nullius, or whether he just said it because it made things easier for his government. You're not sure it matters. The flag went up, the maps were drawn, and back in Europe, plans were being inked that would never include you. The strange thing is how quickly the stories start to contradict. Some journals describe friendly meetings. Others mention spears being thrown and warnings shouted. One record claims a man was wounded by gunfire. Another says nothing of the sort. As usual, the truth is probably somewhere in between, or buried beneath. You go inland after the landing because the tension won't leave your chest. You walk with your uncle to a sacred site, and he tells you the rocks are listening. When strangers come, he says, the land will remember. You hope he's right. Meanwhile, the tall ships keep coming. Portuguese maps may have whispered of Australia earlier. Dutch sailors had already charted parts of the west coast. There's even speculation about Chinese, Arab, or African sailors drifting this way. Fringe theories, sure, but compelling over a campfire. The truth is, long before Cook stepped ashore, others had peeked in. They just didn't bring colonization in their luggage. One cheeky cousin claims there were pirates too, actual pirates. Maybe even Blackbeard, he grins. Dropped anchor, saw the snakes and noped out. You laugh, but only halfway. You sit by the fire that night and retell the story. Not Cook's version, yours. You say, a man came in a floating house. He did not ask permission to land. He brought tools we'd never seen, weapons we could not understand. He claimed a place he did not belong to. Someone asks, but what did he take? You think about it for a moment. The certainty, you say. He took the certainty of what comes next. Cook leaves, but the changes ripple outward. Other ships begin to arrive more frequently. Some stay, some wreck, some never make it. But all of them carry the same idea. This place is up for grabs. Even now you revisit the beach where it all began. It looks peaceful, familiar. But something underneath feels off-kilter, like a song sung off-key. You pick up a shell and wonder if Cook ever held one just like it, if he even noticed the shimmer or just saw specimen. The funny thing is, he almost didn't land here at all. Historians say Cook had nearly sailed past, but he noticed the inlet, Botany Bay, and turned in. A single decision, a ripple, and suddenly your world is bending toward a future it didn't ask for. You climb a headland and look out over the ocean. The same horizon Cook once stared across, full of unknowns. You understand now that this moment wasn't just an arrival. It was a warning. White sails, confusion, and a clash of worlds. And beneath it all, the land watches, waiting. You don't even notice at first. The changes creep in slowly, like cane toads across the top end, ugly, uninvited, and spreading faster than anyone can stop them. At first, it's just more white sails, more strange men in waistcoats sweating under a sun they clearly weren't built for. But soon, their shovels hit soil, and the soil doesn't stay quiet. The colonies begin with flags and ceremony. Sydney, Cove, 1788. You watch from the trees as they unload, rum barrels, shivering sheep, convicts in chains. One of them vomits and cries, another just stares blankly at the gum trees. These aren't conquerors. They're scared, starving, and already regretting their life choices. You'd laugh if not for what comes next. They don't understand the land. You can tell immediately. They try to plant European crops and get confused when wheat doesn't thrive in summer. They drain swamps and curse the mosquitoes. They wear leather boots through spinifex. You're watching a real-time survival show where no one packed the right gear. But then they build. Clumsy at first. Wooden huts, then stone. Houses, then brick terraces. Roads slice through bush like careless scars. You wake one morning and the creek is gone, redirected for cattle. A year later, the trees that once whispered stories are stumps. One by one, the old places vanish, and the language of the land gets buried under surveyors' tape. And still, they build. They name towns after lords who've never left England. Bathurst, Newcastle, Windsor, like stickers slapped onto someone else's diary. Each name overwrites yours. You point at a mountain and say its name in your language. They nod and write down, Mount Disappointment. You sigh. That one's actually fair. The rules change faster than seasons. Where once you roamed freely, you now need permission. A piece of paper to walk on your own ancestral tracks. Fences rise. Dogs bark. Suddenly, you're trespassing on land your ancestors walked for 3,000 generations. Historians call it settlement, but there's nothing settled about it. It's more like a slow-motion conquest wearing polite trousers. Convicts become farmers. Soldiers become judges. And slowly they forget you were ever here. Except when it's convenient to remember, like when they get lost and need a tracker. Your people try to adapt. Some move inland, some find work. Stockmen, servants, guides. You trade kangaroo skins for tobacco. You learn bits of English. But every adaptation cuts a little deeper. Culture phrase. Kinship systems strain. Ceremonies shrink to whispers. And just like the cane toads, the colonies multiply. Van Diemen's Land, Moreton Bay, Swan River, Adelaide. They wrap around the coastline like barbed wire, tightening their grip. Each new outpost means fewer places to hide, fewer stories untouched. You sit with an elder who remembers the old ways. She draws maps in the dirt, no borders, just sacred sites and waterholes. Then she adds lines to show where the white fellas now live. You can barely see the old map anymore. It's vanishing under this new one. She smooths it out with her palm like wiping away a dream. There are pockets of resistance. You hear stories of people fighting back, spears against muskets, ambushes in forests. There's even a tale about a man who stole a whole herd of cattle and led police on a chase for weeks, vanishing like smoke. But no matter how brave, the odds are ridiculous. Your tools were shaped for survival, not siege, and yet you persist. One day, a missionary arrives and hands you a Bible. He smiles like he's doing you a favor. "This will save your soul," he says. You're still hungry. He doesn't notice. Another stranger measures your skull with calipers. "Science," he explains, as if that makes it less weird. He notes your slope and nasal width. You stare at him and wonder if he even knows how to light a fire without matches. You start to notice a pattern. Whenever they don't understand something, they rename it, claim it, or try to fix it. Usually badly. They carve European ideas into a land that resists them at every turn. Their sheep die in floods, their fences collapse in storms, their towns vanish in dust storms. You'd think they'd take the hint. But no, instead they double down. They build more, bigger. Gold is found in Victoria and suddenly the colony explodes. People flood in from everywhere. China, Ireland, California. Everyone's chasing a dream buried in someone else's backyard. You wander through a mining camp one day. It stinks of sweat and desperation. Someone tries to sell you a pickaxe. You point to a distant ridge and say, "That's where the old spirits sleep." He shrugs and digs anyway. Historians still argue whether the colonists genuinely believed they were improving the land, or whether it was always about profit and power. Either way, the result is the same. Forests fall, rivers dry, animals disappear, and your world narrows to a sliver. And yet you're still here. You gather with your mob under the stars and tell stories that weren't meant to survive steam engines and surveyors. You hold ceremonies in secret clearings. You whisper language into the ears of children even when the schools forbid it. One day, a man walks into town barefoot and covered in ochre. He's looking for his cousin. The police laugh and call him a savage. But his presence says something louder than words. We're not gone. We've just been pushed aside. It's a quiet kind of war. One fought in courts and classrooms, on train platforms and station yards. A war of endurance. Colonies creep like cane toads, but they don't know this land like you do. And deep beneath the surface, under the roads, and rubble, the old stories still hum. You just have to listen. It doesn't have a sound at first. No thunder, no warnings. Just a strange hush, like the sky forgot to breathe. And then your auntie falls sick. Then a cousin. Then the old man who never got sick, not even during the bad floods. And suddenly, half your camp is coughing blood under a tree, eyes wild with fever, skin burning. You don't know the word smallpox, but it knows you. It moves like smoke, invisible and choking, sweeping through your clan and the ones beyond, like a cruel whisper. No spears thrown, no shots fired, just shaking hands, blistered skin, and bodies wrapped in bark far too soon. The invaders hadn't even properly finished pitching their tents in Sydney Cove when it hit. 1789, barely a year into the colony, and the virus begins its march. The white fellas suffer too, but they have something you don't. Some weird memory locked into their blood. Generations of exposure back in Europe. You, though? You've never met this monster before. Your body can't even see it coming. You can't keep the fires burning long enough for the funerals. Some say it came with Cook's crew. Others reckon the First Fleet carried it in dirty laundry, or on the skin of a sailor who sneezed at the wrong time. There's even one theory, dark and awful, that it was deliberate, that someone handed blankets infected with disease to the locals. Historians still argue about that one. Some say yes, some say probably not. Some say we'll never know for sure. But either way, the result is the same. Entire mobs gone. Whole languages snuffed out before they were ever written down. Elders, libraries of living memory, gone overnight. You try to remember the song your grandmother used to sing, but it's slipping away, like a rock painting faded by too much rain. And the strangest part? The silence. The settlers don't even seem to notice at first. They're too busy surviving their own mess. Failed crops, runaway pigs, convicts turning bushranger. But when they do finally notice your absence, they don't mourn. They spread further. The disease clears the path before them like a horrific advanced team. You walk through old meeting places now overgrown with weeds. No smoke, no laughter, just echo. You wonder if the land feels lonely. In some places, the survivors band together. Clans merge. Enemies become kin out of necessity. We're a jury and Gunditch Mara sitting by the same fire, sharing tools, trying to rebuild something from what's left. You teach each other words. You adopt each other's totems. It's not the same, but it's something. Meanwhile, the colony starts writing stories about you. You're described in newspapers as a dying race. They sketch you with mournful eyes and cracked feet. They say it's tragic, of course, but inevitable, as if you were just passing through. You grit your teeth. Your stories say you've been here since the dreaming cracked open the sky, that the land is your kin, your spirit. You didn't just pop up for a cameo and die of germs, but try telling that to a man with a printing press and a rifle. Still, you find ways to resist. Quiet ways. You gather seeds from sacred grass and plant them far from the mission station. You etch symbols into bark, hide them beneath dry riverbeds. A child overhears an elder muttering a language no one's supposed to speak anymore, and suddenly that language is alive again, if only for a breath. And slowly, the colony builds itself. A fantasy. It starts to pretend you were never really there. Maps are drawn with empty patches labeled uninhabited or wasteland. Explorers plant flags in places where children were playing just days earlier. They write heroic tales of conquering the wilderness, while you're burying your family behind the dunes. One of your uncles tells a bitter joke. We died so politely they didn't even notice. You want to scream, but there's no one listening. The white fellas build churches and schools. They teach their kids that the land was waiting for them, that God gave it to them, that the people who were here before were gone, or dying, or too primitive to count. You see their books, their drawings. You're either naked with a spear or crouched in fear. There's never a version where you're singing on a mountaintop, laughing by a billabong, painting stories in ochre that outlast kings. Your survival is starting to feel like a rebellion. You know a woman who hides her ceremonial markings beneath colonial dresses. A man who pretends not to understand English so the constable stops asking questions. Kids who pass messages between missions in the patterns they trace in the dirt with their toes. Sometimes you hear the old songs drifting through the night, broken and patched together like torn bark, but still recognizable, still stubborn. It's not just smallpox either. Measles comes next. Then influenza, whooping cough, typhoid. It's like the colony brought a plague sampler box, and each new wave tests you again, but you adapt. You boil leaves into medicines. You teach each other which berries keep the chest clear. You learn quickly which white fella doctors are kind and which ones think you're less than human. You whisper to the land and ask it to be patient. You promise it that your people aren't finished. And while the colony congratulates itself for taming a continent, you sit under a gum tree and count the stars. The same stars your ancestors once counted. You still see them clearly, even through smoke. The ghosts walk beside you now. Not scary, more like companions. They don't whisper much, just hum softly. A reminder that this didn't end with smallpox, that grief can carve space, but also shape strength. Some nights the fire crackles just right and you swear you hear a name you'd forgotten. One of the ones who didn't make it. And just for a moment, they're back. Not gone. Just waiting. You feel the silence long before. It settles like something sacred and broken hanging in the air. It's not just the absence of birdsong or children's laughter. It's a hush that seeps into the bones of country. You walk the edge of a once bustling billabong, and where there was smoke and ceremony, now there's only stillness. This is what the settlers don't see when they map the land in straight lines and sharp ownerships. This grief that clings to the eucalyptus. You're living through the smallpox storm, though nobody calls it that yet. Your mob has no word for virus, no concept for the scale of what's coming. The symptoms seem small at first, spots, fevers, confusion, but they spread like gossip and kill like fire. Within months, whole clans vanish. Some historians argue the disease rode in with the first fleet's blankets. Others say it floated upriver from earlier European contact to the north. Either way, the effect is catastrophic. You move between camps, each one quieter than the last. The people still living stop painting their bodies. They bury their dead in silence, or in some places leave them where they fall because the risk is too high. You hear a word muttered again and again. Ghosts. Not just of ancestors, but of babies and elders who shouldn't be with them yet. Mainstream history books often gloss over this part, perhaps because it's so hard to pin down. There's no front page headline, no exact date, just whispered oral memory, burial mounds, and dwindling fires. But the math is brutal. Some estimates say up to 90% of Aboriginal people around Sydney are dead within a few years of first contact. That's not a typo. 90%. Imagine 10 families at a gathering, then picture only one surviving. And that's only in one region. The disease creeps inland like a fog. Some groups survive longer just because they're more remote, but eventually the sickness finds them too. You sit with elders who no longer tell stories, not because they've forgotten, but because the audience is gone. Languages begin to die, some completely vanish. Knowledge stored in songs, dances, and kinship ties evaporates when the last person who knew the verse coughs and lies still. You want to shake time by the collar and say, this wasn't just loss, this was erasure. Unintentional maybe, but devastating all the same. Some clans try to isolate, others seek out white settlements for medicine and help, though that rarely ends well. At best, they're ignored. At worst, they're corralled into reserves or mistaken for trouble and punished accordingly. You feel the first tendrils of the deep colonial myth forming, that this continent was somehow empty before the British came, that there were only a few scattered nomads, and that they mysteriously died out. You want to scream, we didn't die out, we were infected, abandoned, and forced underground. Among your people, the trauma takes strange shapes. Some begin painting new symbols, snakes curling around white dots, spears with broken shafts, sick-looking animals. A few songs reference a ghost sickness that came from the sea. Historians still argue whether these are metaphors for smallpox or echoes of even older plagues. Either way, they become part of the dreaming now. You might not remember the name variola virus, but you remember the red river it left behind. In places like the Hawkesbury and Parramatta, a few colonial observers notice the dying, scribble, notes, then move on. Decimation becomes a word tossed around, even though that technically means 1 in 10, not 9 in 10. They underestimate the scale. You don't. You feel it in every half-empty corroboree ground, every abandoned fishing weir. But here's the bit they don't expect. You don't vanish. Even in the grip of grief, some clans adapt. They merge with neighbors, adopt new kin terms, blend ceremonies. Orphans are raised by distant uncles. Elders break strict taboos so the stories can be shared faster lest they vanish too. You see women teaching girls how to make dilly bags while the funeral smoke still curls behind them. Boys are handed spears and sent to learn to hunt not just for food, but for purpose. You see resilience like you've never seen it before. It doesn't look like triumph. It looks like survival. And that, for now, is enough. One strange moment stays with you. Along the George River, you meet a clever man who claims to have dreamed of the disease before it came. He saw canoes of fire, people melting from the skin outwards and the sun crying. You're not sure whether he's a prophet, a poet, or just scared like everyone else. But his stories spread, and in them, people find meaning. That's what you do, find shape in chaos. You can still hear that clever man's voice when you sit in a museum 200 years later, staring at a tiny bottle labeled inoculation kit. There it is, the cure that came far too late for your ancestors. It's a heavy moment, but also a reminder. Even when no one came to help, your people helped each other. And now, walking forward through country, you see trees returning. You hear songbirds you thought were gone. And somewhere a child asks about the old scars on their grandmother's arms, round ones like craters. She answers quietly, but she answers. That's how survival works. One story at a time. You crouch behind a tree watching movement in the long grass, no wind. Just men, your men, creeping forward with spears, clubs, and maybe one musket they've managed to steal or trade. You're not hunting kangaroo. You're ambushing settlers. This is war. Or at least it would be if anyone ever called it that. The textbooks you flick through 200 years later might talk about conflict or clashes, but never war. And yet here you are, strategizing, raiding, defending, retreating, and mourning. If it looks like a war and bleeds like a war, the frontier wars, as some now call them, stretch over more than a century. Not one long battle, but thousands of smaller ones. Skirmishes, reprisal attacks, sabotage missions, and massacres. You don't wear uniforms. You don't march in columns. You use country like camouflage, slip through forests like smoke, and strike where least expected. Guerrilla warfare, 60,000 years in the making, And you're good at it, remember, Pemulwuy? If you're walking through late 1700s Sydney, you know his name. He's a Bidjigal man, a warrior, and, to colonial eyes, a total menace. He leads resistance raids against settlers, burns crops, dodges bullets like he's got spirit armor. At one point, he even survives being shot and chained, only to escape and come back angrier. Eventually, they cut off his head and send it to England. That's not metaphor. That actually happened. To this day, his remains haven't been returned. Historians still argue whether Pemulwuy was a rebel or a patriot. You just call him brave. Further north, there's John Damara in the Kimberley, half outlaw, half legend. A Banuba man who learns English ways, becomes a tracker, then switches sides and leads a resistance so slippery, the settlers start thinking he's supernatural. They say he could disappear into rock. They say bullets didn't kill him until one did. The frontier wars aren't organized in the way Europeans understand. There's no central command, no united front across the continent. It's dozens, then hundreds of separate fights, each responding to new incursions. Fences across waterholes, cattle trampling sacred sites, men with guns taking what they please. Your people resist as best they can. Some negotiate, some retreat. Many fight, and so do the settlers. They form militias, mounted police, and what they often call settler protection squads, though protection usually means the opposite. You hear stories whispered in the dark, not around fire anymore, too easy to spot, but under trees or in caves. Stories about poison in flour sacks, about dawn raids where no one comes back, about babies taken from arms and buried under eucalyptus leaves. Remember, PG-13, so we'll stop there. But you feel it. The violence isn't just physical, it's legal. A spear thrown at a cow earns a death sentence. A shepherd's claim that someone looked threatening justifies an entire patrol's revenge. Courts rarely convict white killers. Instead, the survivors are blamed for provoking their own extermination. You watch as justice becomes something elastic, stretched until it breaks. And yet, even in the face of this, some alliances form. There are rare settlers who befriend local groups, learn language, respect boundaries. Some become go-betweens, translators, even protectors. But it's a dangerous tightrope. Too much sympathy and they're labeled native lovers or worse. So most keep quiet or convince themselves that clearing the land is inevitable. You want to shake them. Inevitable for who? One of the strangest things you notice? How? History forgets you. Not just your victories, but your resistance. For generations, this war is erased from memory. No statues for your warriors, no days of remembrance. Just maps with names like Massacre Bay or Skirmish Hill, their stories buried deeper than bones. You pass through Queensland in the 1800s, arguably the bloodiest frontier of all. Mounted police ride in, led by officers with orders, to disperse groups causing trouble. You quickly learn that disperse is a word that bleeds. The native police force is especially chilling. Indigenous men, often from faraway tribes, trained and armed to fight others. You feel the cruelty of that design, using one community's dispossession to enable another's destruction. Divide, conquer, repeat, but there's still resistance. You see tactics evolve, false trails to lure enemies into traps, decoys to confuse muskets, food supplies hidden in impossible places. Your people become shadows, watching the land they know better than any invader could dream. And even when the odds are hopeless, you strike anyway. Not out of some naive hope of victory, but out of principle, out of the fierce, unshakable knowledge this is still your home. Sometimes the retaliation is disproportionate. A single spear thrown at a sheep results in 20 deaths. But other times you win small victories, scaring settlers back, reclaiming a watering hole, or simply surviving one more season. There's a story from the Kimberley that sticks with you. A boy watches his entire clan ambushed and hides in a rock crevice for 2 days, silent and unmoving. He grows up and becomes an elder, teaching stories with tears in his voice. That's how memory works out here. Trauma encoded in language, in song and the curve of a tree where someone once leaned, bleeding. By the early 1900s, the official wars are over, but only on paper. You know better. Violence shifts shape into policies, missions, and removals. But those old battle scars still ache in country. You can feel them in certain rivers, in the silence around certain valleys, and in the way elders pause before answering questions that start with, "What happened here?" Eventually, you stand before a monument. It's small, modest, tucked in the corner of a park. It lists the names of local warriors who died resisting colonization. You run your fingers over the etched stone and you think, at last. But then, you realize, you know of 10 more names that aren't here. Names only your community remembers. And maybe that's the real resistance, remembering when others forget. So you keep walking, keep speaking, keep teaching, because these wars never ended. They just change form. You sit stiffly on a wooden bench, your back itchy from the coarse wool of your new shirt. It smells of soap and dust. Around you, children fidget, their dark eyes darting toward the tall man at the front of the room. He says he's here to help you. He uses words like civilize and improve and educate, but you don't hear your language anymore. You don't hear your name. You've entered the era of missions and lost names. The world is shifting, again. The spears and smoke of frontier resistance have mostly gone quiet, but now there's a different kind of invasion, quieter, bureaucratic, and dressed in Sunday best. The missionaries arrive first, often with good intentions wrapped in heavy hands. They build schools and churches, bringing Bibles and bells, teaching hymns and hygiene. They also bring rules, so many rules. You're told when to wake up, when to pray, what to eat, how to walk, which clothes to wear, which stories to forget. You're taught not to look elders in the eye, not to speak your language, not to ask questions about where your real family went. You're assigned a new name, something nice, something European, something that won't scare the donors. Remember that kinship system you used to navigate like a living web? It doesn't fit here. Your uncle is no longer your uncle unless he's your father's brother. Your cousin isn't family anymore, just another student. And don't even think about calling the river your ancestor. That kind of talk gets you reported. It's not just missionaries. Government protectors of Aborigines begin to pop up around the colonies, eventually becoming a nationwide system. The title sounds friendly. It's not. These are the people who decide where you live, where you work, who you marry, and whether your kids stay with you. They control wages, or don't, pay them, issue rations, and keep files on everything. Literally, boxes and boxes of handwritten reports tracking every detail of your life, from your sleeping habits to your skin tone. Yeah, that's right, skin tone. See, around this time, an idea called assimilation takes root. The theory? If you're light-skinned enough, maybe, just maybe, you can be trained out of being Aboriginal. You pass stories in whispers. Dances happen behind closed doors. A simple carving on a stick or a line in the sand becomes an act of defiance. Welcome to the world of cultural survival underground, a quiet resistance that never sleeps. It's the 1960s now, maybe 70s depending where you stand. Outwardly, everything's changing. TVs hum in lounge rooms, rockets land on moons, and cities thrum with neon speed. But for Aboriginal communities, the rules haven't relaxed so much as shifted, shape. You're still not free, just slightly less chained. Missions loosen their grip, but the scars they left haven't faded. And while the government pretends everything's fair now, your people know better. They always have. Take language, for instance. Some dialects are already gone. Others are just barely clinging on, spoken fluently by a single elder and no one else. You know that once that voice goes silent, the whole worldview it carried will vanish with it. So you write it down in notebooks on cassette tapes scrawled across butcher paper. Some of it's saved. Some of it you only remember when you're half asleep, hearing your grandmother's voice in the wind. You start to notice who's still speaking, in code. Aunties who change languages mid-sentence when white folks walk by. Old men who speak with their hands, not their mouths, when they're on country. It's not just nostalgia, it's strategy. Every recipe passed down in whispers, every body paint design remembered in dreams, every carved emu egg sold on the side of the highway. That's survival. That's defiance. Historians still argue whether this counts as a resistance movement in the formal sense. But let's be real. You don't need a manifesto when your whole culture's under threat. Resistance looks like singing a forbidden lullaby to your baby, like tracing a song line no one else can see, like refusing to forget. You walk past a Catholic mission where the priest still insists, your old ways are gone. But that night your cousins are dancing in the bush to clapsticks and the soft boom of a didgeridoo. They dance barefoot on dust and memory. No one films it, no one tweets it, but it's real. Then you hear of a place up north, Arnhem Land, where some mob never left. They kept to the old ways, more or less. They still hunt with spears and teach kinship in the language of lightning and turtles. The government called them backwards for decades, but suddenly researchers are flocking in, calling them living anthropology. You roll your eyes, but you're glad someone held the line. Meanwhile, in cities, something stirs. Your uncle gets a job driving buses and sneaks young blackfellas into town meetings about rights and land. Your cousin picks up a guitar and starts singing truth, disguised as folk songs. You read poems in underground newspapers, raw and electric, too sharp to be ignored. And sometimes, just sometimes, the system stumbles. You see it when a white archaeologist tries to argue that your people only arrived 10,000 years ago, and your great-aunt bursts out laughing. She tells him about the time her grandfather's grandfather told her about a volcano that erupted before the seas came in. Years later, geology confirms it. 38,000 years old at least. Your family had been telling that story since before the English language existed. There's a fringe theory floating around. Some even call it a conspiracy, that your ancestors have oral traditions mapping constellations and tidal patterns with the accuracy of NASA data. The mainstream hasn't caught up, but you're not waiting. You keep storing knowledge in songs. That's how it's always been done. Not in textbooks, but in rhythm and rhyme, in the vibration of the voice and the tempo of a dance. Your history isn't in libraries. It's in footprints, smoke, skin. And yeah, sometimes you have to be clever. One elder hides sacred shapes in batik designs. Another builds a sculpture trail through a suburban park, each one whispering an old lesson disguised as modern art. You smile every time you see a kid climb on one without knowing what they're really climbing on. Somehow, even the boomerangs keep coming back. You remember a time when tourists would buy your art but laugh at your stories. Now they pause. They ask questions. Not always the right ones, but still, it's something. There's one woman you'll never forget. She was taken at 5, raised in a white home, taught to hate her heritage. At 40, she finds her mob again. Her grandmother is still alive. They speak a little of the old language together. It's shaky, but when they sing that first lullaby, the words come back like they'd been waiting all along. That kind of moment, you can't measure it, but it matters. You realize survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about keeping meaning intact, about making sure your kids can tell the difference between a tourist dot painting and a genuine story passed through 65 millennia. You make your kids sit through the corroboree, even when they fidget. You teach them bush medicine even if they roll their eyes, because someday someone will try to take it again. And when they do, your children will know what to hold on to. So here you are, still here, still singing, still painting stories with ochre and smoke, still dancing between what was nearly lost and what refuses to die. You set it down gently, a beach umbrella. Not for shade, not for leisure. You jab it into the lawn outside Parliament House like a flag planted on the moon. Only this time it's not a declaration of conquest. It's the beginning of a stand that refuses to sit down. It's 1972 and the Aboriginal Tent Embassy has just been born. You're there, barefoot on the grass, watching 4 Aboriginal men unfold this modest protest into a national headline. They aren't waving spears or chaining themselves to fences. They're sipping tea, writing demands on scrap paper, and daring the nation to look them in the eye. And oh, how Canberra stares. You feel the tension ripple. Some politicians laugh, others bristle. And a lot of Australians, white ones, ask, wait, what are they even protesting? As if land rights were some abstract painting no one can quite make sense of. You know exactly what they're protesting. You feel it in your marrow. The embassy isn't about tourism or nostalgia. It's about survival, sovereignty, and a little word that's carried so much weight for so long: recognition. At night, the embers crackle beside the canvas. Someone plays guitar. Elders tell stories beneath the Southern Cross. Journalists crowd around with notebooks, unsure whether they're witnessing a joke or a revolution. One cheeky uncle whispers, "It's both." Historians still argue whether the tent embassy was the first time Aboriginal people truly seized national political space on their own terms. But ask anyone who was there. It was lightning in canvas form. You move through the years and the embassy doesn't fade. It moves, gets torn down, re-erected, moved again, reclaimed space. It's like the idea itself. Stubborn, weathered, unshakable. Governments try to evict it, to legislate it away. Police arrive with batons and bulldozers. And yet somehow the umbrellas keep popping back up. It's become more than a protest. It's a symbol. A living monument, not carved in bronze, but built in breath and defiance. There's no velvet rope around it, no plaques or tour guides. Just folding chairs, painted signs, and people who won't be moved. You're there one day when a school group walks past, shepherded by a teacher who mutters something about activism, like it's a dirty word. But one kid lingers, asks a question, listens to an elder explain what land means, not as a piece of property but as kin. That kid's eyes widen. Maybe it changes something. That's how movements work, you realize. Not always with megaphones, but with campfires and conversations. With one more person understanding that Aboriginal sovereignty wasn't handed over. It was ignored. By the 80s, land rights debates are hot. You see Vincent Lingiari's shadow everywhere. His quiet dignity, his famous handshake with Gough. Whitlam, his boots planted in red soil like they're bolted to the earth itself. And yet the embassy keeps standing, not because the fight's over, but because it isn't. Governments shuffle papers, create committees, offer fragments. One gives, the next takes away. The embassy stays. It's more than just land too. It's about black deaths in custody, about stolen wages, about children still being removed, even now. The tent's fabric flaps in the wind, carrying chants, laughter, and the low hum of a people who refuse to vanish. You laugh when someone calls it an eyesore. That's the point, isn't it? If it were comfortable, it wouldn't be necessary. If it blended in, it wouldn't be a protest. In the 1990s, a new wave of activists joins. Young people with megaphones and street smarts, aunties with placards, and wise eyes. Elders wrapped in flags, their gaze heavy with memory. The tent's not just a relic, it's evolving, and it's not alone anymore. Pop-up embassies start appearing elsewhere, on university campuses, at mine sites, outside government offices. Some last a week, some a year. But all of them trace their lineage back to that first umbrella on the lawn. You start seeing the Aboriginal flag more often too. Red earth, black sky, golden sun. Once a protest symbol, now stitched into national conscience. Kind of, sort of, not quite, but getting there. There's a moment in 2012, the 40th anniversary of the embassy. Thousands gather. Drums, speeches, children dancing on country. A former prime minister visits, then quickly retreats after tensions flare. The media calls it a riot. You call it raw truth. Someone brings lamingtons. Someone else burns sage. It's protest, yes, but it's also a kind of home. A place where elders are respected, where stories are sacred, where no one pretends history started in 1788. You walk past government buildings of glass and steel, but it's this patch of lawn that feels real. And that's the quiet irony. The most enduring symbol of Aboriginal political presence isn't in a government archive or national museum. It's a tent on borrowed dirt, surrounded by eucalyptus smoke and determination. You talk to a young activist one night curled under a blanket beside the fire. She's exhausted, hopeful, frustrated, fierce. She says, "They keep asking when we'll leave," I say, when they finally listen. You sit with that for a while. Not every battle is won here. Not every demand gets answered. But that umbrella, it casts a bigger shadow than anyone ever expected. And you know what else? It's still standing. You stand beneath a red and brown mural, vibrant dots circling in earth-toned spirals, while the hum of gallery lights buzzes above. Somewhere behind you, a tour guide points out the authentic Aboriginal style, while tourists snap photos and nod like they've just uncovered the universe's secrets. But you know better. You know this isn't just a pattern. It's a story. A memory. A map. And sometimes, it's a copy. Boomerangs meet billboards. Welcome to the moment where culture hits commerce at full speed and somehow survives the collision. You duck behind the slick canvas and slip into a community arts center. Paintbrushes crusted with ochre. Kids giggling as they finger paint dreaming tracks over last week's newspaper. In the back, an elder is muttering over a canvas that's been drying for days. One eye on the paint, the other on the lineage that makes him its only rightful storyteller. See, not every painting is a free-for-all. Some belong to families, to places, to bloodlines older than cities. And not just anyone can paint them without permission. But try explaining that to a gift shop in Rome, right? Because as Aboriginal art surged into global galleries in the late 20th century, starting with the Papunya movement in the 1970s, so did the forgeries. Suddenly, desert dots were everywhere. On coasters, on caps, even plastered on airline livery. The boom was wild, and the money was tempting. You know how this goes. Somebody's uncle claims he once met an elder once, and suddenly he's the next big thing in Munich. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In 1983, a painting titled War Lugulong by Clifford Possum Chapalchari sold for just a few $1,000s. In 2007, it resold for $2.4 million. Not bad for a piece that some early critics brushed off as primitive doodles. It's now considered a masterpiece. But even Clifford's works weren't immune to misattribution and commercial misuse. You walk through an airport souvenir shop. A rack of t-shirts hits you with Aboriginal-inspired designs, created by someone named Greg who lives in suburban Adelaide and has always been drawn to tribal aesthetics. You roll your eyes. This isn't just cringe, it's theft. Cultural appropriation dressed as appreciation, served up with a price tag and no context. Still, you spot change flickering in the distance. More Aboriginal artists are trademarking their names, setting up cooperatives and taking copycats to court. The Copyright Agency and Indigenous Art Code have started slapping warning labels on fakes. You smirk when you hear about the time an art dealer got sued for trying to pass off Chinese knockoffs as genuine art. Spoiler, the court didn't buy it. Of course, there's debate. Historians still argue whether the explosion of Aboriginal art into mainstream galleries diluted its original purpose or gave it a new one. Some say sacred imagery lost its power when it became decor. Others believe that adapting to new forms, acrylic, on canvas, digital murals, even NFTs, is just the next stage in an unbroken tradition of reinvention. After all, isn't survival also a kind of art? Outside, a massive mural stretches across a city building, painted by a young Aboriginal artist who grew up scrolling Instagram and sketching ceremony scenes on her tablet. It's bold. It's loud. It's got 500K likes and one angry commenter who claims it doesn't feel traditional enough. You chuckle softly. Maybe tradition is what you make of it when the stories are still being told. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 2010, an Aboriginal artist collaborated with a French luxury designer to put dot art on haute couture handbags. They sold for thousands, and sparked a massive debate in both Paris and Pitjantjatjara lands about whether that was genius or blasphemy. Depends who you ask. Depends who gets paid. Meanwhile, boomerangs go global. Literal ones, yes, but also the metaphorical kind. Aboriginal artists and creators are flinging culture into the air and watching it curve back with unexpected force. There's a kid in London rapping about kinship laws, a muralist in Canada copying a dreaming snake and getting politely roasted for it online. even a pop star sampling clapsticks in a remix that accidentally charts in Sweden. You feel it in your chest, this rising hum of pride and unease. Because while the world is finally watching, not everyone's listening, and those old questions haven't gone away. Who gets to tell these stories? Who profits from them? And what gets lost when sacred becomes sellable? A final scene. You're sitting cross-legged at a community art auction. The crowd hushes, and our elder takes the mic, not to sell, but to speak. He explains every swirl on the canvas behind him, where it comes from, who gave him the right to paint it, the song it carries, the place it remembers. It's not just a pretty piece, it's history you can hang on a wall. The bidding starts. You don't raise your hand, but your heart does. You blink into the glow of a tablet screen, where a 12-year-old in Arnhem Land just posted a drone-shot video of his grandfather drawing ancestral footprints in the sand. The camera pans, music fades in, remixed clapsticks layered under a trap beat, and suddenly, Dreamtime's gone digital. We're not in ochre and bark country anymore. We're in pixels, megabytes, streaming. Now you scroll through TikTok, Instagram, and language revival apps where creation stories re-emerge in 4K clarity and viral edits. That soft background hum? It's no longer wind through spin effects. It's Wi-Fi, humming at the speed of cultural survival. Dreamtime in digital pixels. Once, stories were sung around fire. Now, they're animated with After Effects, same stories. New campfire. You tap on a clip. A young woman in Darwin posts side-by-side videos. On the left, she's painted in ochre telling a story her nan taught her about the rainbow serpent. On the right, she's in LED sneakers, dancing the same rhythm. At a train station in Brisbane, the caption reads, "Not lost, just uploading." Mainstream historical fact for you. In 2017, the National Film and Sound Archive launched an Indigenous Digital Excellence (IDX) initiative aimed at closing the digital divide and helping Aboriginal communities create, code, and broadcast their own narratives. It's part tech boot camp, part cultural renaissance. You're seeing that renaissance bloom across timelines and feeds. Old men who once kept songlines only in memory now record them into microphones. Teenagers tag their mob in group chats about star maps and eel traps. There's even a VR walkthrough of a Dreamtime journey where you glide as a spirit being over ancient landscapes, guided by a whispering elder's voice. Sure, it's slightly buggy, and at one point you phase through a digital kangaroo, but the message still lands. Here's your fringe tidbit. There's an Aboriginal coder who built a language learning video game where every wrong answer sends you back to camp to relearn from aunties. It's infuriating and hilarious, and exactly how knowledge gets passed on, minus the mosquito bites and plus a leaderboard. But it's not all celebration. Some elders still hesitate. They wonder, if everything's online, what stays sacred? Should certain knowledge be locked behind ceremony, not password-protected downloads? Historians still argue whether digitizing Dreamtime material democratizes culture or dilutes it. Is a YouTube animation of the Seven Sisters a meaningful bridge or a simplified soundbite? Can a GIF carry 65,000 years of context? You swipe past, an influencer awkwardly mispronouncing Pitjanchajara. Yikes, the comment section is not kind. Maybe don't turn creation stories into your travel vlog theme song, one person writes. Fair, but then again, how do you police the digital billabong? Once a story's posted, it ripples, shares, duets, reposts. Sometimes it loops back to community, sometimes it doesn't, but adaptation has always been the Aboriginal superpower. Remember the first time ochre touched bark? The first dot on canvas? The first clapstick sampled into hip-hop? You grin, this isn't dilution. It's evolution. You watch an Aboriginal sci-fi web series where ancestral spirits ride satellites and a girl speaks to her totem through an AI interface. It's bizarre. It's brilliant. It works. Outside the screen, elders gather in media hubs, surrounded by ring lights and battered laptops. They're uploading origin stories for grandkids who've never camped without 4G. One man chuckles as he watches himself on playback. "My ancestors used to whisper to the stars," he says. "Now, I'm whispering to this bloody lens." He's not wrong. You click into a podcast where young Aboriginal comedians roast colonization with one breath and honor their grandmothers with the next. A girl drops a mic after a slam poem about being more connected through cable than kin, but still feeling country beneath her bare feet. You tear up a little. You weren't ready. And that's the thing. This isn't about losing tradition. It's about making sure it survives even when the campfire's replaced by ring lights and portable chargers. You pause. Look up from the screen. For a moment, silence. Then a soft notification ping. It's another Dreamtime upload. And you listen. You lean in close. Ears tuned to the soft consonants and rolling vowels of a tongue once nearly erased. The speaker, maybe 10 years old, recites a morning greeting in Korna. Her grandmother watches with pride, arms crossed, tears teasing the edges of her eyes. You blink slowly. This moment, quiet as it is, shakes the walls of history, language revival and song. There was a time, not long ago, when children were punished for speaking these words, silenced in classrooms, laughed at in towns. Their languages, called gibberish. That word itself, a bastardized corruption of jabber, often used to describe Aboriginal tongues with casual cruelty. You shudder. But today, you scroll through a playlist titled Deadly Beats, where ancient lyrics ride electronic waves. You watch toddlers learn kinship terms via sing-alongs on YouTube. You hear songs that haven't been sung in 3 generations, rise again in choir halls, on stages, in schools. Mainstream historical fact. In the 18th century, it's believed there were over 250 distinct Aboriginal languages across Australia, some with dozens of dialects. By the late 20th century, only a small handful were still spoken fluently. The cultural genocide worked quietly, through stolen children, banned speech, and missionary disapproval, but relentlessly. And yet, like grass through concrete, the words return. You enter a linguistics workshop in a regional library. Elders sit beside university students. They're translating old word lists, digging up grammar structures from 19th century notebooks written by curious colonial clerks. Some of it is jumbled, incomplete, or just plain wrong. Emu spelled 14 different ways, but it's a starting point. It's dusty gold, quirky tidbit for you. In the 1990s, a group reviving the Barngarla language discovered a word that had no clear English equivalent. It described the smell of rain hitting dry soil, mixed with eucalyptus breath. Basically, the scent of home. No dictionary had it. But they knew exactly what it meant. You murmur the word. It feels like tasting memory. Every revived syllable carries a lineage. Language is country, and country is sung. In many Aboriginal cultures, you don't just walk across land. You sing it into being. Your feet remember the lyrics of the soil. And when those songs go quiet, the land does too. Historians still argue whether some languages can be truly revived without a full chain of fluent speakers. Some say it's impossible, like gluing together a shattered pot without all the pieces. Others insist even fragments hum with life if you listen the right way. And anyway, isn't relearning a kind of resurrection? You wander into a classroom in Alice Springs. The kids chant, clap, repeat. Ngayulu itinga. I'm going. They don't just learn verbs, they learn ancestors, places, protocol. It's not Duolingo, it's survival. Nearby, a DJ spins a set in Pichanchajara. The crowd dances. Someone raps in Yorta Yorta. A grandmother hums a lullaby that her grandmother sang once upon a mission dormitory after lights out. Quietly, carefully, like rebellion in a cradle. Back in the city, government road signs begin to change. Welcome now reads Womanjeka. Airport announcements open with acknowledgments of country, in language. You smirk. That's new, that's something. But revival isn't linear. Some words are gone, some dialects are ghosts. You hear debates bubble up. Should we standardize spelling? What happens when different clans pronounce things differently? Who owns the right to teach a sleeping language? And what if some people are just guessing? You're okay with the uncertainty. Culture has always allowed for wobble and remix. As long as the intention is respect, the rhythm returns. You remember a linguist saying once, "Language is breath. If we speak it, even imperfectly, it lives." So you speak it. Just one word, softly. It curls in your mouth like warm tea. Your chest feels different. Somewhere, a spirit being listens and smiles. You stand under a sky that's too bright, too hot, too silent. The breeze carries the bitter tang of ash and eucalyptus. Familiar, ominous. Beneath your feet, the ground is cracked, groaning from too many dry months. The rivers barely whisper anymore. And then on the horizon, smoke. Again. Fire, flood, and climate fight. This land, your land, has always burned. But not like this. Not this angry. Not this often. The old people knew fire like they knew kin. When to call it. How to feed it. How to put it to sleep before it turned on them. You, though, you're watching fire turn from friend to beast and beast to warning. Mainstream historical fact. Aboriginal fire stick farming shaped the continent for tens of thousands of years. Patch burning created grassy corridors for kangaroos, reduced fuel loads, and protected sacred places. It wasn't just burning. It was conversation with the land, slow and thoughtful, like trimming a bonsai made of forest and spirit. But colonization interrupted that rhythm. Fire became fear. Authorities banned cultural burning, misread its wisdom, mistook controlled flame for carelessness. Forests thickened, fuel stacked, and the land forgot how to breathe. Then came Black Summer. You remember it clearly, 2019 into 2020. Flames taller than radio towers moving faster than wind. Towns lost, species erased, koalas crying, firefighters crying, the sky blotted out with apocalypse orange. It felt like the continent was exhaling millennia of stress all at once. Not a purge, a scream. Quirky tidbit? During that fire season, a community in Arnhem Land requested permission to conduct traditional burns, even as surrounding areas banned all flames. Their country was untouched by megafires. The elders shrugged and said, "We told you, fire is not enemy, but you don't listen." Now, people are finally listening. You join a cultural burning workshop deep in the bush. The fire starts small, almost polite, a line of orange licking at dry grass. The ranger, indigenous and confident, tells you the wind, tells you the trees, points out an old stone scatter and says, "That spot's for the wallabies. Burn light there." You nod, sweating. It feels like learning to speak again, but with smoke. Historians still argue whether traditional ecological knowledge can fully mesh with Western science. Some insist Aboriginal methods are intuitive or unproven, a backhanded way of dismissing 65,000 years of empirical data. Others, the smarter ones, realize that science is finally catching up to songlines. But it's not just fire. It's flood, too. You drive north. Monsoons that used to come once every few years now dump oceans in weeks. Rivers swallow houses. Crocodiles wander down highways. It's all backwards. In Central Australia, deserts bloom from sudden downpours, and then die just as fast, cracked and thirsty again. The patterns are off. The seasons spin confused. In Torres Strait, you visit a family watching their ancestors' graves disappear under rising tides. The ocean now laps at the bones of their stories. They build rock walls and say prayers, but the sea keeps eating. Climate refugee isn't a future term. It's Tuesday. You attend a protest in Melbourne. Signs read, "The land is speaking." And fire is not the enemy. Forgetting is. Young mob march alongside grandmothers. One kid holds a painted boomerang that reads, "Planet before profit." You give a tired grin. Same fight. Different battlefield. You scroll later that night and find drone footage of elders doing cool burns with university scientists. There's a hopeful harmony in it. You hear terms like two-toolbox approach. Western science in one hand, Aboriginal, knowledge in the other. Not competing. Complementing. Still, it's not easy. Some communities want to burn, but land management laws won't let them. Others don't have the people or resources left. Too many youth lost to systems. Too many elders gone without passing on what only they knew. You feel that ache heavy and real, but you also see sparks. Quite literally, a program in Victoria trains Aboriginal teens in climate resilience. They learn cultural burning, plant knowledge, drone mapping, and digital storytelling all in the same week. You ask one girl what she thinks. She shrugs. We're just cleaning up what colonization messed up. Simple, accurate. Back in the bush, the flames dance low and clean. Smoke rises in thin curls, not choking towers. Birds return as if by invitation. You sit in the warmth, watching light move like memory. You understand suddenly that fire isn't just destruction, it's punctuation. It clears, resets, reminds, and if fire is a sentence, you think, then climate justice must be the story you choose to write next. Your feet hit the pavement with a soft, defiant rhythm. Around you, a sea of voices, strong, angry, tired, hopeful. Banners wave overhead like sails in a storm. Some say Black Lives Matter. Others list names: David Dungay Jr., Tanya Day, Kumanjai Walker. You chant with them, though your voice catches a little on the names. Black Lives Matter. Black deaths here. It's one thing to watch the world erupt over George Floyd. That knee, that breath, that moment on camera that finally broke something global. But here the brutality isn't new. It's old, woven deep into the nation's story, as if invisibility were policy. And in many ways it has been. Mainstream historical fact. Since the 1991 Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, over 500 more Indigenous people have died in custody. 0 police officers have been convicted for any of these deaths. That's not oversight, that's design. You feel it in your bones. The protest snakes through the streets of Brisbane. You pass murals of elders, kids holding hands, gum leaves, painted red and black. It's loud, peaceful, powerful. Auntie with a megaphone shouts, "Say their names." And you do. You feel each one like a pebble in your chest. Later, you sit in the park with some of the marchers. One of them, a Wiradjuri bloke with sharp eyes and a tired laugh, tells you about the first time he was handcuffed for walking through a shopping center too slowly. You don't ask what that means. You know what it means. Quirky tidbit. In 1979, an Aboriginal protester named Gary Foley brought a suitcase full of fake passports to a United Nations event in Geneva. Each passport was issued by the Aboriginal Provisional Government. His point? Aboriginal sovereignty has never been ceded, and they shouldn't need Australia's paperwork to prove they exist. It made headlines, and customs officials very confused. You scroll later that night. Hashtags light up the screen. Justice for Walker. Sovereignty never ceded. Invasion Day. One post reads, "Your silence is a privilege. Our pain is not new." You pause, then repost. It's not enough, but it's something. Historians still argue whether the violence of colonization should be classed as genocide. Some hedge with phrases like cultural erasure or displacement, like soft bandages, over sharp truths. Others point out that stolen children, massacres, and policies of assimilation meet every textbook definition. Still, you hear people say, "But it wasn't that bad, was it?" And you fight the urge to scream. You learn about the freedom rides of the 1960s, where Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal students traveled through rural towns to protest segregation. One stop was Walgett, where Aboriginal ex-servicemen weren't allowed into the local RSL club. Another was Moree, where Aboriginal kids were banned from the public pool. That's your parents' generation, not ancient history. Yesterday's newspaper. At night, you lie awake thinking of the stories that never make headlines. The boys locked in solitary, the girl who died after being denied medical care, the grandmother left for hours on a concrete floor, the CCTV footage missing, the coroner's report delayed, the answers that never come, but the voices grow louder. You visit a community mural project. Each brushstroke is a name, a story, a reminder. One boy paints a fire, Another paints a chain breaking. An elder adds a white gum leaf, softly whispering, "For the ones who didn't make it home." You step back. The wall breathes. You're not just marching now. You're witnessing a resurgence. Aboriginal youth are leading rallies, starting podcasts, calling MPs, and running workshops on decolonization and cultural safety. They wear shirts that say, "Always was, always will be." You wear one too, but you also see the cracks. Social media burnout, intergenerational trauma. The weight of fighting a fight your great-grandparents never stopped fighting. You hug someone who's crying. They say, "It just never ends." You say nothing. There's nothing to say. Just stand with them. In Parliament, politicians say words like commitment and review. In communities, people say words like funeral and another one. The gap doesn't just persist, it yawns. Still, you show up. Every protest. Every vigil. Every smudging ceremony outside a courtroom. You listen, you learn, you unlearn. And one day someone asks you why you keep doing it. You say, because it's not just history. It's happening now. You wake to a sky you don't recognize. Not because the stars are new, but because the haze of smoke turns them amber and strange. The wind carries the scent of something ancient, scorched eucalyptus, charred kangaroo dung, a whisper of burning memory. The land crackles. Beneath you, not just with fire, but with tension. It's the heat of a continent that's been pushed too far, too fast. You walk through singed grasslands, each step a soft crunch of carbon. This isn't your first fire, not by a long shot. Your people have lit careful flames for tens of thousands of years. Fire is scalpel, not sledgehammer. Back then, you knew how to talk to the land with heat. Now, the land screams back. You're in a landscape shaped not by bulldozers, but by wrong timing. The undergrowth's too thick, the canopy too dry, and fire doesn't creep anymore. It gallops. And yet, you remember how it should be. You remember patch burning in cool seasons, drawing fire breaks with smoke and instinct. You remember fire as medicine. Controlled flames that welcomed back green shoots, invited in wallabies, and coaxed seeds to life. That was fire knowledge. That was power. And now, scientists start nodding like they've just discovered sliced bread. You smile wryly. Cultural burns, they call it, like it's some shiny new thing. You taught it to their great-great-grandfathers and they ignored you. Or worse, outlawed you. Still, you walk beside the embers, not away from them. Because even now, even after the megafires of 2019-2020 scorched millions of hectares and turned the sky blood orange, your people still know what the land wants. Historians still argue whether indigenous fire regimes could have prevented that catastrophe altogether. But on country, no one's confused. You pause to touch the ground, warm, breathing. You whisper to it in a tongue nearly lost, still alive in the cracks. Somewhere nearby, a drone whines overhead, mapping regeneration. A ranger in high-vis asks if you've GPS marked your fire zones. You nod, amused. Once upon a time, your mob tracked this with the stars and the crunch of bark underfoot. Now there's an app for it. You're part of a new wave. Indigenous-led fire management groups, blending ancient knowledge with satellite data and ecological science. You ride quad bikes where once you walked barefoot. You carry drip torches, but your wisdom burns brighter. On the radio, an elder explains cold burns to a curious interviewer. It's not about fighting fire with fire, he says. It's about talking to it. Fire doesn't destroy when it's respected. It heals. The bush thrives in its wake. Still, the climate's changing faster than even fire can keep up with. You've seen floods flatten communities one season, only for drought, to choke the same rivers dry the next. You used to trust the wet and dry, the wind's direction in certain months. Now the weather feels drunk. You ask yourself, how do you teach fire lore to a land that's forgotten its seasons? You walk past a mob of kids from the local school, all in wide brim hats, giggling as they plant native grasses in ash-black soil. One asks if the plants are fireproof. You tell her they're fire smart. There's a difference. Fireproof things break when they finally burn. Fire smart things know when to bend, when to sprout, when to wait, like your people. Nearby, an artist paints the story of a fire spirit on a corrugated fence. Flames curl into the shape of a kangaroo, leaping across ochre hills, scattering seeds in its wake. It's more than art. It's a map. You know this, because you can read it. That's the thing they often miss. Your stories are ecological blueprints disguised as myth. Ancestral how-to guides with a flair for drama, and then a joke bubbles up. You whisper it into the wind. If only someone had told Captain Cook that fire was our Wi-Fi, maybe he'd have asked the password before cutting the trees. You chuckle, but the sadness lingers. Because this isn't just about climate change. It's about climate justice. Your mobs have always been on the front lines of environmental damage, but rarely at the decision tables. Now finally, you're being asked, not just seen. Rangers funded, fire teams supported, language included in recovery plans. It's not enough, but it's something. A spark. Of course, not all listen. Some still think, let it burn, is the best plan until the flames lick at their property lines. Some say you're playing politics with bushfires, as if the planet itself isn't political. You try not to roll your eyes. After all, even the cleverest gala needs time to realize the cage is open. There's a fringe theory gaining traction that maybe the future of this sunburnt country lies in remembering the oldest way of living with it. Not dominating, but dancing. Not fighting nature, but partnering with it. Some call it radical. You call it common sense. You call it culture. As the sun dips low, you crouch beside a controlled burn line. Smoke curls in lazy ribbons across the twilight. You exhale slowly, letting the rhythm of the land slow your own heart. This is the old way, and the new way, and maybe, just maybe, the way forward. You flick a smoldering stick aside and feel for a moment something like hope. Fragile, flickering, but real. You're marching now. Not across country with spear in hand, but down asphalt streets. Boots echoing against city concrete. Around you, faces blur into a sea of placards, paint, and purpose. Some chant, some cry, some just walk, shoulders set, eyes forward. The names spill from lips like prayer and protest at once. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Kumanjayi Walker, Tanya Day, David Dungay Jr. You add your voice to the wave. It's louder than you expect, and quieter than it should be. You didn't start this march, but it feels like it's been coming for generations. The sign you carry is simple. Black Lives Matter. It fits in your hands like something you should have been holding your whole life. You glance down and think, wasn't it obvious? But history says otherwise. You flash back to a grainy police station cell. David Dungay Jr. dying while screaming, "I can't breathe." You remember the news anchors saying it quietly, then moving on. You remember the inquest, the shrugs, the silence. This time, though, the silence cracks. Minneapolis ignites, and half the planet watches. And somehow your pain is finally seen through someone else's death. Your breath fogs in the winter air as the crowd surges. Someone hands you a candle already lit. The wax drips down your wrist, but you hold it steady. You think of how many vigils your mobs held, how many deaths in custody, over 500 since the Royal Commission in 1991. And yet, no justice, just spreadsheets. Coroner's reports stacked like firewood. But you keep marching. Historians still argue whether the Black Lives Matter movement sparked genuine policy shifts in Australia or just momentary outrage. You feel both, momentum and mourning, hand in hand. The Prime Minister says now's not the time for division. You roll your eyes. We've been divided since 1788, mate. Someone mutters behind you. A laugh ripples down the line. Gallows, humor, classic. A woman beside you wears a shirt with every language group's name printed in white. It flows across her torso like a map. You compliment it. She smiles and says she made it herself. That's the thing about movements. You don't wait for permission. You print, you post, you march, you teach. TikToks go viral, breaking down sovereignty, deaths in custody, and the difference between acknowledgement and action. Elders on Instagram, teenagers on megaphones. This is a chorus now. Still, you feel the weight of the contradictions. The flags are waved with pride, but some were only legalized last week. The anthem still hums in the background of football games, pretending history started with Captain Cook. And behind every "We stand with you" corporate tweet is a boardroom quietly calculating what solidarity might cost. You pause outside a police station where flowers pile like snowdrifts. Someone reads out names through a crackly speaker. You close your eyes and listen. It's long, too long. Then a silence falls that's heavier than shouting. A little boy near you asks why nobody helped those people. His mom doesn't answer. You understand. Sometimes there are no clean answers, only dirty truths. Back home, you wash the city off your skin, scrub the soot from your throat. The chants still ring in your ears. You stare at your reflection and think about that uneasy intersection where your blackness meets the badge. Your cousin's still a cop. Your nephew's terrified of them. Both have their reasons. You don't judge. Later, you visit Auntie on her veranda. She's crocheting something that might be a scarf or a statement. All this marching, she says, reminds me of '88, bicentennial. They said we were ungrateful for not celebrating invasion. She chuckles. We marched anyway, always will. You sip your tea. The sky is bruising into twilight. You feel it again, that thread tugging from past to present. In your dreams, you're walking beside Jandamara in the Kimberley. Then it's 1938 and you're holding a Day of Mourning sign outside Sydney Town Hall. Then you're with the Palm Island mob, fists raised, demanding justice for Mulrunji. Then you're here now, phone in hand, streaming a protest to someone 3,000 kilometers away who feels less alone because of it. One quirky tidbit floats into your brain. Did you know that in 1972, the Aboriginal Tent Embassy listed Black deaths in custody as a key reason for its founding? That was over 50 years ago. You blink. Nothing new under the sun, eh? Still, it's not all grim. You see change, slow as it is. Police wearing body cams, inquests followed by real recommendations. More mob in politics, on screens, in courtrooms, fighting, from the inside. A younger cousin tells you she wants to be a lawyer, so they can't lie to us anymore. You ruffle her hair. That might be the best protest yet. The next rally's already being planned. You'll go, even if your knees ache, even if the news cycle's moved on. Because for you, this isn't a trending moment. It's a survival ritual, a reminder that you're still here, still angry, still hopeful, still marching. You're sitting, cross-legged on red dirt, fingers dusty with ochre when the words start flowing. Not spoken but written, not just on bark or rock, but on crisp white paper, with deliberate, trembling care. The Uluru Statement from the heart. You watch it unfold like a long breath held for centuries. It's not just a letter, it's a call, a beckoning, a gentle hand extended with the weight of 65,000 years behind it. You know this because you helped write it. Or maybe your cousin did, or your great-aunt, or that quiet bloke from Yirkala who hardly talks, but always listens. Either way, it comes from all of you. The 2017 National Constitutional Convention at Uluru feels like a rebirth. Over 250 First Nations delegates gathered on Anangu land, arguing, laughing, crying, telling stories until bones ached and coffee ran out. And from that, something rare was born, consensus, not just a complaint, a vision. You still remember the first line. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky. It hit like a didgeridoo's first drone, low, vibrating, unmistakable. You felt it. That the statement wasn't about begging. It wasn't a request for charity or crumbs from the Crown's table. It was a blueprint, a roadmap. 3 clear points: voice, treaty, truth. Historians still argue whether this moment marked a turning point or another beautifully written dead end. You know better. It was a fire starter, not a flicker, but a signal flare. First, voice, a permanent, Indigenous advisory body enshrined in the Constitution, not just hand-picked panels here one year, gone the next. a body that can't be deleted when the government changes color. You remember the critics yelling about special treatment, but you roll your eyes. How special is it really to be heard in the decisions that affect whether your community gets a dialysis machine or a youth center? Second, treaty. Not in the symbolic sense, but a real negotiation between First Nations and the nation-state. It's late, embarrassingly so. Other Commonwealth countries inked theirs decades ago. New Zealand, sorted. Canada, complicated but in progress. Australia, still acting like this place was empty when Cook showed up with a telescope and a superiority, complex third truth, and that's the sharpest of the three. Because truth hurts. It means telling the whole story. Massacres, slavery, stolen wages, denied dreams. It means school kids learning that Australia Day is someone else's mourning day. It means removing bronze statues with bloodied boots and putting up new ones that actually tell the truth. But here's the most striking part. The statement isn't angry. It's hopeful. Painful, yes, but still brimming with love. You think of that line again, the one that always catches in your throat. In 1967 we were counted. In 2017 we seek to be heard. You whisper it like a spell. Aunties read it aloud in classrooms. Uncles take it to men's groups. Teens remix it into slam poetry and TikToks. It spreads, quietly, beautifully. And still, politicians look sideways at it, wary of what it might cost them. There's a joke going around, light but sharp. The Uluru Statement's only dangerous if you read it. You laugh every time, then sigh. You join the movement to get it recognized, to get voice into the Constitution. You help at info booths, hand out flyers, explain it over sausage sizzles outside footy games. You simplify it for the 100th time. We're asking for a seat at the table, not the whole tablecloth. You watch the campaigns heat up. For once, the debate isn't just in university halls. It's on street corners, in TikTok duets, in awkward dinner conversations. People say strange things. Some mean well but miss the point. Others don't mean well at all. You try to stay patient. One quirky thing you remember? A group of grandmothers crocheted the entire Uluru Statement onto a long scroll. Took them months. They presented it at Parliament, smiling like they knew something the politicians didn't. Maybe they did. You feel the pulse of something real now. Not just the dream of voice, but the possibility. For the first time in ages, people talk about Indigenous rights not as ancient history, but as today's homework. You revisit the rock, Uluru itself. You sit under its shadow, red against the sky, and you think about everything that's been said under its gaze. Your ancestors talking story, missionaries mumbling sermons, now politicians muttering about constitutional amendments. The rock's seen worse. You rest your palm on the stone, warm, steady, listening. Because the truth is, this statement, from the heart, isn't just about Aboriginal people. It's about the heart of the nation, what kind of country it wants to be, what kind of story it wants to tell the kids watching right now from their classroom mats or behind their parents' legs. You're proud, hopeful, a little tired, but ready, because this time the story wasn't written about you. You helped write it. You're watching the results come in, but your stomach already knows. Each electoral map flickers across the screen like a wound reopening. Suburbs, cities, whole states shading themselves in a cool, clinical no. It's not just a rejection, it's a slow-motion gut punch. You stare, unblinking, as the voice referendum crumbles under the weight of fear, confusion, and whatever lives in the comment sections of major news outlets. No. The word feels heavier than it should. Just 2 letters, but somehow it flattens. Years of dialogue, tears, and roundtable meetings held in dusty community halls. You remember how hard your mob campaigned, flyers printed on shoestring budgets, info sessions with barely enough chairs, cousins door-knocking like it was a matter of life or death. In a way, it was. You sit in silence. No speeches. No slogans now. Just a numb scrolling through screens full of faces trying not to cry on national television. Some can't help it. Others stay stoic, their expressions like sandstone, weathered but immovable. It's a chilling thought, but that's the official goal. to breed out your culture, to erase your people not with swords but with school books and wedding certificates. You live under the Act, the Aborigines Protection Act, the Half-Caste Act, various bits of legislation that give officials sweeping power over your life. You can't vote. You can't buy alcohol. You can't enter certain towns after dark. You're not considered a citizen in your own country. You're classified under Flora and Fauna Acts in some states. That's not a joke. That's real history. And through all this, you're expected to smile. You walk past white families in town who call you boy or gin or worse. You try to buy food with your meager rations or stolen coins, and shopkeepers either ignore you or shortchange you. If you're lucky, someone might let you work for a few days fixing fences or sweeping floors, but always for less than the white workers. Often for nothing at all. Payment in food and lodgings, they say, as though a cold shed and a bowl of damp flour count as fare. But here's where it gets more complicated. Not every mission is the same. Some are brutal, others are sanctuaries. Some missionaries genuinely care, learn the local language, protect kids from removal, and quietly support resistance. Others are tyrants, enforcing silence and shame with switches and scripture. There's one mission where an elder still remembers a priest who learned every child's name, sat with them under stars, and listened to dreaming stories in secret. He didn't write any of it down. He said it wasn't his to record. Historians still argue whether missionaries overall did more harm than good. You already know your answer. The strangest part? Sometimes, in the midst of all this, something beautiful grows. Music, art, stories whispered in dormitories, secret dances held under moonlight when the priests are asleep, carved message sticks hidden under floorboards, a child humming a forbidden tune as she sweeps the chapel steps. You cling to what you can, the shape of a rock, the echo of a word, the smell of smoke that reminds you of someone who used to carry eucalyptus leaves behind their ear. You memorize the faces of elders who vanish one by one, taken or broken by rules that don't make sense. The missions often separate boys and girls. It's supposed to prevent immorality, but it also severs kinship lines. You forget who your cousins are, who your family even was. The stories fade. You wake one day and realize you don't know your own totem. That's the real theft. Not land, not wages, but memory. Occasionally, an anthropologist visits. They ask questions, take notes, maybe snap a black and white photo. Very interesting, they mutter, scribbling observations in leather notebooks, then disappearing back to cities where they'll lecture about your life without ever inviting you into the room. By the 1920s and 30s, missions are everywhere. Some are run by churches, others by governments. Some isolate you in remote areas. Others sit just outside town, behind wire fences. You grow up seeing freedom just across the road but never quite reaching it. And yet, you endure, because somehow, despite it all, you remember. You remember the way your grandmother used to hum as she ground seeds. You remember the story about the goanna that tricked the moon. You remember the exact shape of a handprint on a cave wall, high and faded but still there. And when the time comes, you pass those memories on, in code, in song, in quiet eye contact that says, you're not alone. You survive the missions. But the story doesn't end here. The next shadow creeps even closer, dressed in white uniforms and carrying official papers. They won't just try to control your name, they'll try to take your children. You're 5 years old, maybe 6, you're not sure. No one ever told you exactly when you were born. The sun's hot through the corrugated roof, and you're playing in the dirt when you hear the truck. You don't know it yet, but everything is about to change. The adults go quiet. Someone grabs your arm, hisses, run to the bush. You don't. You're too slow. 2 men get out, one in a pressed shirt, the other in a uniform. They have papers and that serious voice grown-ups always seem to obey. Your mother's crying. You're lifted off the ground. They say you're being saved. Welcome to the era of the stolen generations. It sounds dramatic, right? Stolen. But that's exactly what it was. For much of the 20th century, Aboriginal children were taken from their families by governments, missions, and welfare agencies. Not a few, not occasionally, tens of thousands. Entire communities emptied of children, just like that. The reasons? Officially, to protect you, to give you a better life, to assimilate you into white society. Unofficially, to erase a people by removing the next generation. If that sounds like cultural genocide, that's because, well, yeah. Historians still argue whether the term applies legally, but morally. You don't need a courtroom to know. The answer: you're loaded into the truck, then onto a train. You see your country blur past, hills, gum trees, water holes you used to swim in. Gone. The next place is strange. Cold sheets, foreign smells, unfamiliar faces. You're given a new name, told to forget your old one. The institution might be a mission dormitory, a state home, or even a white foster family. Doesn't really matter. What matters is what you lose. Your language, your stories, your connection to country, your mom's lullaby, your cousin's jokes. The way your people walk softly through the bush. You try to remember, but memory slips away. Sometimes you're placed with a loving family who means well. More often, you're not. Abuse is common. So is neglect. You're punished for speaking. Your language, for crying at night, for asking questions. You scrub floors, eat last, wear hand-me-downs that never quite fit. You learn to keep your head down and your voice quiet. Some kids run away. Some are caught. Some vanish. You start to believe what they tell you, that your people are dirty, your heritage is shameful, your history isn't real. You hear it so often it starts to stick. By the time you're a teenager, you've forgotten how to introduce yourself in your own language. You barely remember your mother's face. Years pass, decades. You grow up, drift through jobs, maybe bounce, between towns. You carry a quiet ache you can't quite name. Some nights you wake up from dreams full of red dirt and voices calling you home. But you don't know where home is anymore. You start looking. And here's the twist. You're not alone. Across the continent, thousands like you are searching for lost families, lost names, lost stories. You hear whispers about link-up services, programs to help reconnect families torn apart. Some of you do find your birth parents. Some learn they died waiting. Some meet siblings for the first time in 40 years. The reunions are messy. Tears, anger, awkward hugs, sometimes even laughter. One man tells you he never knew he was Aboriginal until he saw his face in an old mission photograph on the wall of a museum. Another says he grew up believing his mother didn't want him, only to find her grave covered in flowers she left for him every birthday. Every story is different. Every story is the same. Governments take a long time to admit what happened. Too long. It isn't until 1997 that the Bringing Them Home report finally gathers it all. Testimony after testimony of stolen childhoods, broken families, and aching silences. The stories are harrowing. But finally, they're heard. Sort of. Because even with the report out, some politicians dodge the word sorry. They argue about responsibility. They worry about legal compensation. It becomes a political tug-of-war, with survivors caught in the middle. Then, finally, in 2008, you hear it. On the floor of Parliament, a Prime Minister stands and says it. We say sorry. You're watching it on TV in a community hall, surrounded by aunties and uncles, many holding tissues. Some cheer, some cry, some just nod, solemn. One elder crosses her arms and says, "Took 'em long enough." That moment echoes, but apology doesn't undo damage. It doesn't erase what was lost. You still see it in communities today. The generational trauma passed on, the missing knowledge, the anger simmering under smiles. Whole families still trying to rebuild lineages cut in half. Some people never find their roots. Some decide to plant new ones. Still, stories survive. Even if the official files are missing or redacted, even if the elders are gone, the whispers remain. They live in lullabies sung again after decades of silence, in family trees drawn on butcher's paper and kitchen walls, in kids learning the language their grandparents were beaten for. And here's the strangest thing of all. Despite everything, your people aren't broken. Bent, yes. Wounded, definitely, but not broken, because even while you were being taken, someone else was holding the line. Out in the bush, in remote corners in dusty towns, some families managed to hide their children. Aunties who packed up and vanished before the welfare truck arrived. Communities that built informal schools in the scrub. Elders who carved language into walking sticks so it wouldn't be forgotten. They were the guardians of what you're now reclaiming. And this fight for memory? It's not ancient history. It's still happening. Every identity form, every court, case about heritage, every argument about curriculum, it's part of the long recovery from the theft of generations. You're still piecing together who you are, but you're no longer silent, because now you know what was taken. And you're not afraid to say so. You keep your head low. You learn to nod, to smile politely, to say yes, sir, even when your spirit screams no. The language in your mouth has been scrubbed clean, but underneath that surface silence, something fierce still simmers. You go outside. The air feels different, lighter and heavier at the same time. You think back to 1967, the referendum that gave your people the right to be counted. That one passed in a landslide. Tonight feels like it's opposite. Counted, sure. Heard? Apparently not. Historians will later debate why the Yes campaign failed. Misinformation? Maybe. Weak political leadership? Definitely floated. Or perhaps Australia just wasn't ready. But you shake your head. That phrase, not ready, you've heard it too many times. Not ready for land back, not ready for treaty, not ready for truth. At this rate, your great-grandkids will be hearing not ready while the sea eats the coast and the last emu does a sad shuffle on a wildlife documentary. You think about how your auntie put it. Every no vote is a little louder than just disagreement. It's not hate, but it isn't care either. That lands, because caring takes effort, and maybe the country just couldn't be bothered. You make tea. You text your sister. You okay? She writes. You reply with a shrug emoji. What else is there to say? Yet even as the disappointment clings like smoke, something unexpected stirs. Not rage exactly, not hopelessness either. Just clarity. You know where you stand. You always have. But now you know where a lot of other people stand too. And still, you move. Because history hasn't just been something that happens to your people. It's something you make. One protest. One meeting. One stubborn auntie who refuses to sit down when the mic is handed to someone else. You go back to your local community.
Up the next day.
It's packed. Elders, teenagers, tired parents balancing babies in indignation. No one's celebrating, but no one's staying home either. You help stack chairs, pour juice, pass around the tissue box when needed. Auntie stands up to speak. She doesn't mince words. They might have said no, but we're still here. They don't get the last word. We do. Someone claps, then a few more, then the whole room. You realize something. The voice was a plan. But you? You're a person, and they didn't vote you away. You pull out your phone and reread the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Again, it still sings. Still stretches across time like a song line too sacred to silence. You close your eyes and picture your ancestors, those who walked barefoot over cracked desert, those forced onto missions, those who raised you on stories and soft warnings. They didn't stop. Neither will you. One quirky ripple in all this? After the vote, more people than ever start reading the Uluru Statement properly. Some admit they hadn't even looked at it before voting. You try not to scream. Instead, you post a link with a caption that just says, "Still here, start here." It gets shared a lot. You take stock. The voice was never the whole answer. It was one tool, one mechanism. You've still got culture, country, connection. You've still got land rights battles unfolding, language programs thriving, activists organizing, artists creating, young people dreaming bigger than anything a referendum box could contain. You think of other fights. Vincent Lingari didn't stop when they said no. Mabo didn't pack up after the High Court stalled. The tent embassy is still standing. And so are you. You return to the rhythm of daily resistance, walking in culture, mentoring the next mob, keeping the fire burning. And maybe that's the greatest power you hold. They can vote no 1,000 times, but you still wake up on unceded land. You still speak your truth. You still belong. The sun sets on a tough day, but you watch it anyway, just to prove you can still find beauty after disappointment. The colors over the bushland are pure fire. You whisper into the twilight, half prayer, half promise, we'll try again, and again and again. Because while they said no to the voice, they never took your voice away. You stand barefoot on red earth, dawn soaking the sky in soft pinks and oranges, and you realize something you've always known, just maybe forgot for a minute. You're still here. Your mob is still here. The ground hums beneath your souls with a heartbeat older than any constitution, older than empires, older than the idea of Australia itself, and it sings your name. Survival, you've learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's passing down a story over dinner. It's a kid learning to dance the brolga properly. It's an elder refusing to die without teaching 5 more grandkids their language. It's persistence in 100 invisible ways, some of them so subtle even the census misses them. You walk through a modern town center, glass, steel, concrete, and beneath it all, you feel the echo of a campfire that burned there long before. Bunnings long before Meyer, long before colonization called itself permanent. That's the thing no one gets unless they really listen. The dreaming isn't the past, it's always. It stretches forward just as easily as it reaches back. You see your people in every corner of life now. Sporting stars wrapped in flags after a goal. Politicians in parliament rising to speak in language. Kids in graphic tees with ancient motifs remixed like digital graffiti. And sure, there's still racism. Still erasure, still a battle. But this is the long game. And you're playing it beautifully. You visit a school. The welcome to country is led by a student who couldn't even say Nagura 2 years ago. Now she beams, steady and proud as the other kids respectfully bow their heads. That's not performative. That's repair. Small, incomplete, but real. Now universities are queuing up to learn it properly. They call it cool burning. Now like it's the hot new trend, but you smirk, knowing your people were doing it while pyramids were still scaffolding. And those stories you whispered underground during the mission years, they're on podcasts now, stage plays, national curriculums. One even got turned into a musical comedy about a bunyip with anxiety. You nearly cried from laughing. Historians still argue whether Aboriginal Australia is the oldest living culture or simply the longest unbroken chain of shared memory. Either way, no one else has a 65,000-year-old blueprint for resilience carved into cliffs and DNA. You do. You head back to country, not just to visit, but to belong. The landscape greets you like a cousin who never left. The trees lean in. The birds change their song just slightly, as if they remember your nan's laugh. You lay down under stars so thick it feels like you're being watched by every ancestor at once. You wonder for a second what the next 65,000 years might hold. You see artists painting not just with ochre, but with styluses and drones. You hear elders joining Zoom calls from outstations, debating language syntax across fiber optic lines. You imagine a generation raised not just on bush tucker and footy, but on treaty negotiations and climate restoration. A generation who doesn't have to prove their identity at every turn. A generation who grows up knowing they come from a people who never stopped walking forward. You still march. For justice, for lives cut short, for names the headlines forget. But you also dance. You cook, you laugh, you bury loved ones, you birth new ones. Life continues stubborn and sacred. One quirky thing you notice, Aboriginal memes are elite now. Seriously, dark humor, cultural pride, and political zingers in one JPEG. Aunties are sharing them with captions like "this you" and emojis. They only half understand. It's resistance, but make it funny. You sit by a fire again, this time surrounded by 3 generations. The youngest is learning to clap sticks properly. The oldest is humming a song line no one recorded. But everyone knows. The night wraps around you warm and slow. You speak, and they listen. Your voice, shaped by all that has come before, doesn't need permission anymore. It just is. Because you're not just a survivor. You're a storyteller, a culture bearer, a quiet storm, and when people ask, "How are you still here?" you smile and answer, "Because we never left." So now, as the fire crackles low and the night drapes itself gently across your shoulders, you let the story soften. You've walked through millennia tonight, from ochre-streaked cave walls to neon protest signs, from the footsteps of ancestral beings to the scroll of the Uluru Statement. You've carried it all, felt its weight, its beauty, its heartbreak. Let it settle now. Breathe in slow. Let the dust of the desert coat your lungs, just a little. Let the laughter of those who came before echo in your bones. You're not walking alone, you never were. This story wraps around you like a woven rug passed hand to hand across time. No need to rush back. Stay in this quiet moment. The wind in the spinifex whispers lullabies only the land understands. The stars blink patiently above, not in judgment, but in welcome. Even the trees seem to lean a little closer, guarding your rest. The dreaming hasn't ended. It waits for you to close your eyes and find your way back in. You've heard the story. Now you carry it too. So wherever you are, curled up in bed, lying on a couch, earbuds tucked in under the covers, just know you're part of something older than time and tougher than any empire. Sleep well, storyteller. Sweet dreams.